Welcome to another edition of the PhinManiacs.com podcast. I am your host, Louis Sung, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Chad Ronnenbaum. And we'll have many more guests coming very shortly. In fact, Ian Wharton of the Bleacher Report, he's a good friend of the show. He'll be joining us in just a few minutes. And of course, Max Himmelrich of the Deep End Miami, he's quickly becoming a staple on this show, so he'll be here as well to discuss all the various topics that we have this evening. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. The Dolphins are hiring some new offensive, defensive assistant coaches. We've got some draft discussion to get done. I just recently had my first film session, which was actually very interesting, and I'm glad to have gotten an idea of what it is that scouts actually look for when they're looking for at potential draft prospects. And because at this point it's pretty much becoming necessary to discuss, as much as I kind of want to avoid the topic, we're going to talk about some Ryan Tannehill tonight because there's been a lot of reports recently about Tannehill, but Tannehill was not going well with the coaches, that Joe Philbin didn't have confidence in him, and now there's the whole idea that Joe Philbin didn't say anything until like a week before the draft started, and he should have said something a long time ago. I mean, it's just a really, really big mess, is what everything has turned out to be. And unfortunately, we're going to have to just kind of, we're going to try and make heads or tails of this. And we're just pretty much going to give our reactions to what it was that Armando's been reporting over the past couple of weeks, because he's primarily the one who's been reporting all of these things about Philbin and about Tannehill and the laser, and all it's really doing is showing just how much of a dysfunction the Miami Dolphins organization was in, and hopefully Adam Gase has some idea of how he's going to remove all this dysfunction. So far, he seems to be putting together a decent staff. Just today, it was announced that Jeremiah Washburn, formerly the Detroit Lions, was going to join. Excuse me, it's actually the other way around. Jim, or is it? I don't even know anymore. The father-son duo of Jeremiah and Jim Washburn, both formerly of the Detroit Lions, are going to join the Miami Dolphins as a offensive line and defensive line coach, assisting here. Terrell Williams is rumored to be staying on as a defensive line coach, so Jim Washburn will be acting as an assistant, and then Chris Forrester, he's going to be the offensive line coach primarily, and then Jeremiah Washburn will be his assistant. So assistants with a lot of there's going to be a lot of stuff to talk about here tonight, and I just want to get your opinion first, Chad. What do you think of all these new assistants? How would you rate Adam Gase's overall coaching staff so far?
Honestly, Lewis, I can't give you a real good answer because it's hard to judge assistants. To me, it's all about how well they work coherently and how well they do their specific jobs. I think on Miami, the assistants to pay closer attention to for sure are the defensive ones because I don't anticipate Adam Gase having a ton of direct involvement in what the defense is doing. So, what I was looking for was some experience on the defensive side of it because I felt we needed coordinators that were capable of kind of maybe being a little more autonomous on the defensive side. So, I thought Washburn made some sense. He's got a lot of experience on the defensive line. And really, that's all I got for you. There's no name out there that's super exciting or super shocking. I know a lot of people were wanted Schwartz, and I think he was at Philadelphia. He was going to
Yes, he
today,
just got signed by the Eagles.
and so it kind of trades off as you don't really want a coach behind your head coach that people want to call for. It's kind of like when you have your quarterback and you have a young quarterback in place, you don't want to bring in a guy behind him. That was always the Tebow syndrome where they feel like people are going to want him instead. And so I think Gase is looking for probably some very specific types of coordinators. And that's really all I got is I think I assume he's bringing in who he wants. And for certain reasons, I haven't seen anywhere where he's struggling to get coordinators, so I assume they're the ones he wants.
And I see that Ian Wharton has joined us. Ian, thanks for joining us this evening.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So, how would you rate exactly what Adam Gase has done so far building coaching staff? I mean, I know that Forster so far is pretty much the only one that everybody's looking at and saying, why the heck did he hire him? But let me hear you. I want to hear your opinion. What do you think of what he's managed to put together so far for a staff?
In general, I'm a fan, probably as much of a fan as you probably could be. Like you guys mentioned, it's kind of hard to really know which assistants are really good and which aren't, especially the ones that are taking promotions from other places. But all in all, I wasn't a fan of Forrester's hire, and I wasn't a fan of the wide receivers coach that they brought in. Miami, for some reason, has been like a place where if you sign with Miami, you're guaranteed to not have as good of hands as you did in your previous destination.
Hmm.
I don't know why that is. I quite frankly, I have no clue how that could happen. But Greg Jennings' hands got worse. Jarvis Landry's hands got worse in 2015. It's just Mike Wallace. I mean, he kind of dropped off anyway, but it's still just an issue. Brandon Gibson, like all these guys were just much worse in Miami than they were previous places as far as reliability. And I have no clue how that happens. And if you look at the guy they brought in from Tennessee, um, kind of the same story happened in Tennessee where Kendall Wright's been the exact same guy out of college. Justin Hunter never got better. Durrell Green Beckham, he's the guy that you could probably point to that made some sort of progress, I guess. But he was always kind of like that freaky wide receiver anyway. So I'm not sure if the three routes he was running for Tennessee was something coaching or if it was just like his physical dominance just taking over. So that was kind of maybe like a lateral move at best, and maybe we'll see. Maybe it'll end up proving a little bit more effective than what it looks like at face value. Other than those two hires, I mean, I do like the rest of their staff. I like Vance Joseph bringing him in, and we'll see if that ends up coming to fruition. But he's got a strong background. I like that he has experience in a 3-4 and a 4-3. He's learned under some great defensive minds. Wade Phillips, obviously, probably the biggest name. Mike Nolan's another good one. And then obviously in Cincinnati, he worked with some good staff as well, Marvin Lewis and Gunther as well. So all in all, I think that's a good start. I like the defensive positional coaches that they brought in. Mark Duffner, losing him was kind of a tough one. Um, that was probably the questionable move I'd make on the defensive side. It's like, why would you let go of Duffner? Because Duffner did a good job of making the undrafted free agents that they brought in. They found Neville Hewitt. Um, they had four of the undrafted guys, and you get pretty happy if you find one or two that can stick on a roster long term. And I think that they found at least one, maybe two. So obviously, Johnny Jenkins' development, if he can just stay healthy, that's going to be a player that you want to keep moving forward as well. So, well, all in all, it's not bad. It's not like the big names. It's not a lot of guys that you can sit there and say, oh yeah, that's definitely going to be a great hire. But Washburn, I think that was probably one of the better hires, especially for like name recognition and kind of like his resume is one of the stronger ones. So I think it's a good staff. You can always churn guys after a year or two if you end up not liking them, but these are guys that he's familiar with, he's got connections with. I think there's reason for optimism for the most part, with the only real two gripes coming at offensive line and wide receiver, which is kind of unfortunate because those are two of the positions that Miami really needs to see growth from here very quickly.
You mentioned Duffner, and that actually surprises me because other than Neville Hewitt, I would say that the Miami Dolphins linebacker core, like all those undrafted free agents you mentioned, you said that, yeah, they stuck on a roster, but considering just how god awful the linebacker core is that necessarily because Vigil and Hull and all those guys are that good, or is it just that the linebacking starters are just that bad that there was really no reason to remove them? They weren't that bad by comparison.
Yeah, I think it's a good mix. I mean, the talent that Duffner was given was far from ideal. You're not going to be able to do much with Koa Misi, Calvin Shepard, even before them, Danell Ellerbe and Philip Wheeler. Like none of it was a mix. Like they personnel wise, and this is at the GM level, they just went too far from one extreme to the other, where they had just a bunch of run stuffers, and then they wanted more coverage ability, and then they got rid of all the run stoppers for pure coverage guys, and that didn't make any sense either. So then they overcorrected again by just getting rid of all talent at the position and just going with physically limited guys that couldn't do either. So it's Duffner was in a tough spot. I really don't know what more he could have done. Um, like I said, you saw Hewitt come on at the end of the season, and that's really the big positive is that you're saying, okay, like now we at least have like a workable piece for the defense moving forward. And like I said, Jenkins is a starter. Like he's going to be a starter no matter where he's at. If he's in Miami or anywhere else, definitely a starting level linebacker in the NFL. It's just the problem is that the other two positions were so obviously bad that those two positions just need to be completely overhauled.
I also now, so that was what Ian had to say. Now I see Max Himmelrich of the Deep End Miami and recently of the Finsider with a PH. Those guys are stealing all the good writers. If Max, if I had known that you were looking for another place to write, I would have leaped on the idea of getting you on like without even blinking twice.
I wasn't. It was very funny. I wasn't even looking necessarily. Matthew approached me about it, and
Oh, he did, huh?
I thought it was a great chance. I was super excited to be able to work with them. They're branching off into a little bit more and film study type pieces, so I wanted to be a part of that.
Okay, well, we're glad to have you on, Max. So I've been asking the question, and I'm gonna repeat it for your sake. How would you rate Gase's hires so far?
Individually or as a whole?
Well, as a whole and individually, if you want.
As a whole, I'd probably give it a 7 out of 10. I'm really happy with a lot of them, but just incredibly unhappy with Chris Forrester on the offensive line. I think he is a proven coach that he has not done a good job at that spot. But other
I think we lost Max here.
oh, hello?
Hello.
Hello? Got me now?
Yeah, I got you now. What happened?
Not sure. But
anyway,
so
as you were saying,
yeah, I am a huge fan of the Clyde Christenen hiring because in his previous job he was not a play caller. And he won't have to be a play caller in Miami because Adam Gase is handling those duties. So what he can do is he's worked with preparing quarterbacks to play on Sunday for years. He worked with preparing Manning, he's worked with preparing Luck. And with this Adam Gase offense, because Gase added so many of those principles from Manning, where you have to make reads at the line of scrimmage and identify blitzes and audible, ready during the week and teach him how to study film. It's not just that you study, it's knowing how to study it. And so he's going to have to look with Kristen in at how to study this film and how to really break down a defense on Sunday. And I think it's the perfect guy for the job to help him do that. And on defense, I don't mind going with a young guy there. I would have preferred going with a more experienced coach rather than Vance Joseph, but I take absolutely no issue with that hiring.
okay, so see, here's the thing, and I was actually discussing this with Ian just before you got on here. The idea of Mark Duffner, he said he was one thing that he didn't really like was the fact that they let go of Mark Duffner, and and he apparently was able to do a lot with the linebacker core. He was able to bring in 4 undrafted free agent linebackers and turn them into something decent. But my argument is that the talent level just really wasn't all that special to begin with, and so like the likes of Vigil and Hull, and the only one that we really saw step up to the plate was Neville Hewitt. So I would imagine I couldn't see anything other than maybe if Hewitt is like the only guy who developed, and Vigil and Hull have really not done much of anything, then I would question why is Duffner such a big deal. I mean, I guess you could make the argument 1 out of 3 ain't bad, but then again, 1 out of 3 ain't good either.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between being able to get a player up to speed and being able to put them in a situation where they can excel. I think they were able to get those linebackers into a situation where incredibly quickly they took undrafted free agents and were able to help them learn the system and become knowledgeable enough that they were able to play. But I don't you have Ndamukong Suh up front, the linebackers become more important than the defensive line. So I think he should have. I'm with you on this, Lewis. I think he should have done a better job with that group because it should be easier and they should be getting better looks for the linebackers to shoot gaps and rush the passer and to end up in the backfield and run plays. But I mean, he also was dealt the worst linebacker core in the league. I mean, in 2013, we decided it would be a good idea to trade Kevin Burnett and Carlos Dansby for Philip Wheeler and Donnell Ellerby for all intensive purposes. And it could not have been a worse call. We got more expensive at the position and got worse at the position. And we're still trying to dig ourselves out of that because before this season, They just decided we need to get rid of these guys. We need to get rid of Wheeler and we need to get rid of Ellerby, and they just got rid of them. They were luckily able to get Kenny Stills for Donnell Ellerby, effectively making Kenny Stills our 3rd-round pick. But it's going to be interesting to see how the new linebackers coach works to help rebuild this position, because I see it as a possibility that Miami only returns one starter next season, and that's Jelani Jenkins.
Do you have a response to that, Ian?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Max was right. I mean, they need to add talent to the position. I mean, it's got to happen, and I don't think it was a mistake getting rid of the old guys, but it's a mistake to get rid of the old guys and not have a plan in place to actually upgrade the position.
Right.
And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, and that's the thing is like you can't just get rid of guys and then not reinvest in the position with whether it be veterans or it be young players. I mean, they completely whiffed on last year's draft as far as like being able to build positions up that desperately needed talent. They took luxury picks instead. And so, I mean, and that's fine. It's fine to take the best player available. I believe in taking the best player and best talent available, but it's like then don't complain when, you're struggling at certain units that you obviously just completely overlooked or didn't care to invest in. So they've just got to add some new talent in there, and if they want to become more of a dynamic defense, they've got to bulk up that front seven from defensive tackle to defensive end to linebacker. It all has to be better because they were just for large stretches last year just horrible, especially when Cameron Wake went down.
Lewis, you know who they could use to do that? They could
Yes,
use to
Miles
bulk up the
Jack.
front seven.
Miles Jack.
Yes, sir.
I want him so bad. I really want him so bad. And like I said earlier, I recently went through my first film session with both Keith and Duke, and I gotta say, and people are probably gonna get mad at me for this because I keep getting tweets about this guy all the time. Even after, like, even me as a first timer, and even with Keith and Duke there with me to actually walk me through exactly what it is like to do like one of those draft film sessions, I still liked Miles Jack by far better than Reggie Ragland or even Jalen Smith. I still think that Miles Jack
I think
is.
he's close with. I think he's close with Jalen Smith, but I agree. I like him much better than Ragland. I had a question for Ian, really quick, regarding Miles Jack. My roommate and I were wondering about this. What does he do poorly? What is he bad at?
Um, Well, I mean, it's just really what he's asked to do. So, I mean, he does a lot of the flashy things. He does things that people really want to see, like he covers slot receivers and he shoots
Yeah.
gaps
Isn't that what
really
we
well
need?
because well, no, because you have to think how many times is he going to be asked to be covered Julian Edelman? If he's ever asked to cover Julian Edelman, he will be literally targeted every single time. And that's not really just Miles Jack's fault. It's just there's literally no linebackers that can do that. He just doesn't. I mean, he's 245 pounds. Like that's just not going to happen. So,
I
and
remember
yeah,
watching
it's
that last season. Sitting there, I was sitting in the Rose Bowl. My Miles Jack playing corner, and I said, "There's no way. There's no way he's playing corner." And I watched him. I mean, it's a receiver, so NFL is completely different. Stick with receivers in the red zone. I mean, even at the collegiate level, it's just so impressive what he can do there. But you're right, in the NFL, it would just not work.
yeah. I mean, and there's other guys that can do that too. By the way, I mean, Darren Lee out of Ohio State does the exact same thing, except for the difference is
Okay.
you're not going to get him in top 10. You're going to get him like late first round. So like, there's more linebackers coming out that with that kind of like crazy skill set and kind of like crazy athleticism. It's just going to keep kind of like popping up. So like, my issue with Jack is that to me he's just like he's a souped up version of a really good weak side linebacker. Because obviously his athleticism is insane. But if he has to take on blocks heads on, we don't know what he can do there. He doesn't shed blocks, period. Like he'll run into blockers really hard and like exert a lot of force in that sense. And it's good that he's really strong and explosive, but like we already knew that. So like we don't need to like double count that on his positive side that he's super twitched up and explosive just because we see him do it against a blocker. I actually kind of look at that as a negative that he's wasting the energy and that he's opening himself up to injury. What we need to see from him is, and what we won't see, and this is really like where the projection comes of, can he actually take on a heads-on blocker, use his hands to break the block, but also manipulate the runner into his lap, which is what really good middle linebackers do. because that's kind of what
Mm-hmm.
separates guys from like Ernie Sims from Patrick Willis. And like the coverage ability is great. I like you definitely want to have that. But if you look at like a guy like Bobby Wagner in Seattle, which I think that's probably going to be like the popular for people that think he can be a middle linebacker, which I think he can be a middle linebacker. It just depends on the what you're asking him to do more so than what you need him to do like on like a play to play basis. It just if your expectations are Patrick Willis, I mean that's a huge projection. If you're asking him to just be a guy that can drop into space and coverage, and then you're opening big holes for him to shoot, then you're going to really have to soup up that front line. Like you're going to need a great defensive line, kind of like Seattle has. When Bobby Wagner was the best linebacker in the game, it was because he had two gappers in front of him, even in a 4-3 scheme, to help open up clear holes for him to just attack downhill. Now, if that's your plan with him, then that's fine. Then you can probably have him be a non-instinctual middle linebacker because he doesn't have instincts. I mean, if you watch him play the run, he doesn't have instincts. He's just literally watching and then trying to shoot the gap as fast as he can. That's just a weak side linebacker. So I mean, that's you're not paying a top 10 price for a weak side linebacker. You can find those on day 3 of the draft. Again, you're just paying a premium because he's a great athlete. So for me, that's the concern with him is like, are you just taking a better version of Jelani Jenkins that high?
That's what I was
Or
just about to ask. Yep.
yeah, because that would be my concern. Now, like I said, you can try to probably play him and Jenkins, especially on passing downs, because the coverage ability is going to be really good. I just have really big reservations on him, and I have a first round grade on him. I think he's going to be a good player. I think he's going to be a really exciting player and something that you want as far as like defensive chess piece. That's really what you want to build. You want players like that. It almost sucks that Miami has Hewitt and Jenkins on the roster because those are two similar players. So
I
you're kind
do
of
you
adding a
hey
third player like that.
hey Ian, I was just wondering, do you think Miami may try to shift Neville Hewitt to the inside in the offseason? Maybe try to bulk him up a little.
I'd be surprised. He just doesn't have that big of a natural frame.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't either. I just was
he was
wondering.
he was what like a fifth year player I think at Marshall. So I mean
Yeah.
Yeah,
he's probably maxed out where he's at, or maybe you can try to help his body. I mean, you'd probably have to see him without his shirt and stuff. So I don't know exactly, but that would be
yeah,
kind
that's
of
true.
surprising. I mean, he's kind of been one of those guys too, where it's just he's more of like that weak side blend. That's kind of why like I would lean more toward a guy like Ragland, who's like, yeah, he's not as great in coverage, but he's good enough in coverage. Especially you can just drop him into a zone, and he's going to do a lot better than guys like Kelvin Shepard and Koamisi can do. He's way more athletic. I mean, Ragland was a guy, he literally had his hand down in the dirt as a pass rusher on a handful of snaps, and he was beating guys around the edge. So I think he's going to surprise people with his athleticism. And when you're comparing like pure middle linebacker skills, he's way better than Miles Jack. Like you have a lot of film available to show and be able to see there. Like this guy is like, he is a hammer. He is the definition of like a really good middle linebacker mold, even if it's not like the elite coverage guy. He's in like an elite run defender, and he's got coverage
Yeah,
skills.
I agree
And
with you 100%. Yeah, I mean this was something. I mean, we talked about last year, and I think you nailed it very accurately when you said they took a luxury pick. 'Cause that's exactly what Jordan Phillips was, in my opinion. Was he was a luxury pick. Miami really wasn't in a situation where they desperately needed defensive tackle help coming into last year, but they did need linebacker help, and that's been the frustrating part to me is they just have not had good middle linebacker play in stopping the run in a long time. I mean, yeah, it's nice to have somebody like Zach Thomas who can run sideline to sideline and play at his weight, and he's just so instinctually good, and he's such a student of the game. He can shed blocks and play on the inside too. But the reality is I still feel like Miami they should have strongly considered Denzel Perryman in the second round instead of Jordan Phillips because that guy is exactly what you're describing. He's a big hammer of a middle linebacker, and it doesn't do you a lot of good to have a middle linebacker. You're so obsessed with being able to cover people when teams can just run the ball on you, and it's just happened to Miami the last few years over and over. And I feel like they need to get that middle linebacker. But in terms of the draft, I have to agree with Ian. I don't see Miles Jack as being a guy that's going to be your middle linebacker. Obviously, it'll depend on what Miami is going to do defensively. When Jimmy Johnson and Dave Wanstead were with the Dolphins, they were big believers that you got linebackers that could cover really well and run sideline to sideline really well, but they also play much bigger defensive ends to be able to stop the run. And if Miami's going to play defensive ends the size of players like Livy and Cameron Wake, they have linebackers that are very solid tacklers, linebackers, and you can't mix, poor athletic linebackers with undersized defensive end. It's just a recipe for disaster in stopping the run.
Well, I'm certainly not going
And
to.
yeah,
I'm not going to assume that I know better than what Ian does. I mean, Ian's been scouting NFL draft picks for years now, and I'm just getting. I literally had my first film session just last week, so I mean, I still got a lot to learn.
Well, I don't think you're wrong. I think Miles Jack's a very
No.
good-looking football player, Lewis. He just does. I mean, he's 230 pounds, and I mean that. When you got the big lineman slamming at you, and you got the running backs coming in there, can he hold up on the inside and stop the power running game? And he would. If I were going to be playing against him, I wouldn't be necessarily trying to match him up in passing games in my tight end. I would just power run right at him and see if he can hold up on the run, and that would be a really big question mark at a guy eyes.
Yeah,
and yeah,
and
Ian,
just
quick question: where do you
yeah.
think, after with all of that, where do you think Jalen Smith comes into play after the injury
yeah, how
in terms
far
of
does he
where teams
drop
will pick him?
essentially?
Oof, that's a tough one. Um, the NFL's been all over the place with guys that have coming off like a major injury like that. I mean, they've taken guys like Brandon Thomas a couple years ago into the San Francisco 49ers in the third round. Ifo Ekpre Alamu went seventh round last year. Very similar injury. Some guys have gone undrafted. Some guys have gone like Mark Lattimore, like end of the third round, fourth round area. So, I mean, I would say probably that third round is where he probably should go based off of history. But none of those guys were prospects like Jalen Smith were either. So can a
Where
team
would you
like
rank him healthy backers inside?
probably top 10 overall. Um,
Mm.
he's another guy. Like, so he from weak side linebacker to middle linebacker before his junior season. So he at least has like that year of experience at middle linebacker, unlike Jack. So he has more reason to believe that he's going to be a really good instinctual, um, feel it before he sees it or be able to read it and instantly react to it. Middle linebacker. So I think he's got that higher end middle linebacker upside because he's very similar athlete to Miles Jack. If he's healthy, there's no doubt about that. Jack, and Ragland are all three excellent prospects at the linebacker. I mean, any way you cut it, they're very, very, very good players. But he's kind of like that complete package that you look for. It's just that injury it's tough. It's really hard to sit there and invest a day one pick into a guy that's definitely not playing in 2016, and we don't know what he's going to be when he comes back from that injury. People can downplay the significance of like ACL injuries and stuff, but they're still major injuries, and they can still cut into a career and cut it short. Even by 2 or 3, 4 seasons, and that stuff has to be put into consideration because you're already losing a year at the front end too. So uh, my guess is maybe like round two, someone just because he's such a good prospect, maybe they just invest that high or mid second round pick into him. But it wouldn't shock me if you were to tell me in 4 months from now that he went top 20 either. It's such a strange situation with him and very unfortunate too.
So it doesn't seem like
But
you're too sold on Jack up for Miami at 8. What do you think is a smart play there positionally?
Um, I'm definitely about taking the elite talent, so it just depends on who's on the board. Like in the scenario that like we know that Laramie Tunsil's going to be gone, the tackle from Ole Miss. He's surely going to be gone. He'll go top 3 for sure. Joey
Mm-hmm.
Bosa probably be gone, but he would be number 1 on my board if we're looking at, realistic the guys who might be there. I'd probably put Bosa 1. Jalen Ramsey would probably be up there as well. The free safety out of Florida State. And I would definitely want him at safety. Wouldn't really want him outside at corner. Not that he's not going to be really good there. If someone gave him time, he'd probably be really good there. But I mean, he's a project at that position as opposed to safety where he could just be a star, an absolute star very quickly. And then you're starting to look at the linebackers. I think that it's fair to already start looking at the linebackers out of those two just because you just need to take the best player and you need to take the most talented player. The roster's in that condition where it's, they could use stars anywhere. So, and then you start looking at, okay, well, Jalen Smith's probably not going to go top 10, nor probably should he. So then it becomes really Miles Jack against Reggie Ragland. And I'd be perfectly fine taking either one of them there. If you're going to take Jack, though, you just have to commit to saying, okay, then we need to get bigger up front and protect him more. So you need to figure out what to do with that other defensive tackle spot, especially because Jordan Phillips has been more of a pass rusher than a run stopper. So then you really need to get a guy who can two gap at that nose tackle position. So day 2 of the draft, you're looking at guys like Austin Johnson out of Penn State. He'd be a really good guy actually to get to help protect Jack to give him more holes to shoot. Or you're looking at Ragland, who we mentioned, is more a little bit more like that traditional middle linebacker. So I think both are going to be high on their list, and they should be, just because again they're impact players in that mold that you can't get too often, and those are also, it just happens to be like that one of those huge positions of need. So like I said, I'd say Bosa, Ramsey, and then one of the two linebackers. If you walk away with this draft with either one of those four, you're going to be pretty happy, at least with that first round. Jack just makes it to where you just have to trust in your projection of him, which is fine, but there's higher risk for him as well.
To
What
go
about
along with what Ian is saying there too, just a couple players to think about. Obviously the draft's going to get drastically impacted what happens in March in free agency, and I don't. The two big players that are going to be questionable are, one is Earl Mitchell. He's about a $3.5 million. I'm just looking at his cap number right now. He's about a $3.5 million cap hit next year, and he would be about $1 million in dead cap space. So that's not a really really expensive defensive line, but I mean right now, if you were to do what Ian is suggesting, that would basically mean Earl Mitchell would be more of a depth interior lineman. Because I just don't think Earl Mitchell is stout enough to be able to do that. So they're going to need to look at more of an anchor. And then Cole Meese is similar. I think he's about, let me look him up. I think he's about 3 million as well, and not a huge dead cap hit either. So a real big question is going to be if Miami is going to change their scheme up. Are they going to essentially bring in heavier defensive linemen with the idea they want to have their linebackers be more athletic? That, to me, that would mean, what would you be keeping Earl Mitchell for, and what would you be keeping Cole Meese for? So that would kind of go along with that.
Well, I mean, I my idea has always been that we need linebackers first because, and this is just the logic that I've been using for this whole looking at draft process, is that what right now is the biggest need based on what we currently have and what we could potentially work on in the future. Right now at cornerback we have Brent Grimes, who I would assume is going to stay one more year. It's better economically speaking if we keep him around for one more year, not to mention he's literally the only corner that we can actually say he's still a starter in the NFL, like not even Pro Bowl worthy, just a decent starter, because we don't know what we're going to get out of Bobby McCain. We don't know what we're going to get out of Tony Lippett yet. Bryce McCain, I would assume, is not going to stick around. I would assume also that these other people out here, they're just not. I mean, you look at these guys, and there's nobody other than Grimes who you can say, well, he can be our starting corner. And starting corners in the NFL are not cheap. And Chad, you were the one who tweeted this earlier. Like if we cut Brent now, we get $3 million in dead money and only 6.5 in cap space. And I don't think, and I agree with you, I don't think there's any way you can upgrade from Grimes for only 6.5 million. I mean, starting corners are a hot commodity. So
Yeah, and you need, in the reality in today's NFL, you really need three. I mean, all the time, you need three capable corners, or somebody like Tom Brady. They figure out where your weak corner is at, and you either gotta adjust your defense, to help them, or they just pick on them relentlessly. And so you're very accurate in that. Bobby McCain and Tony Lippett are hugely unknown. I mean, they showed some flashes of potential, but I mean, they're by far no means somebody I'd want to go into the season expecting them to be my 2 and 3s at corner. And so Miami desperately needs to address it. And elite corner, there are some, as of right now, you don't really know what's going to happen until free agency hits, but there are some potential very talented corners, coming onto the free agency market. But you're right, they're expensive, and Miami's just had this cycle of, if a guy doesn't maybe quite work out, they cut him, and then we end up, with what we went through with linebackers with all these dead numbers. And I just don't think for 6.5 million you're going to get a corner on the market in free agency anyway that's going to be a significant upgrade over Grimes. And to do that, if you're going to upgrade over him, he's going to be substantially probably more expensive. You're going to have to commit a big guaranteed bonus to him. At the same time, just basically throwing Grimes' bonus to dead money. So my opinion is that there's no health issues that I'm aware of with Brent Grimes. You can say he didn't have a great year, but you also have to understand he got matched up in a lot of man-to-man coverage against number one wide receivers because our defense's inability to stop the run meant we had to use our safeties a lot more in run support. And so I don't know that Grimes got worse or our defense as a whole got worse, and he was being asked to do something that is very difficult. I'm not saying I'm going to confuse Brent Grimes with, like Peterson or something from the Cardinals. He's not like, one of the top 2 or 3 corners in the game or anything like that. But I think it just creates another hole at a position where we already have a lot of uncertainty. So I would be a big advocate to keep Grimes. And, just as the 2 players we mentioned prior, if we were to let Earl Mitchell and Cole Messi go, that's almost $8 to $9 million we free up in salary cap space that we could use, to address other positions. And I feel like we could probably get somebody like Earl Mitchell potentially replaced, more affordably, like a guy like CJ Mosley did, or as Ian mentioned, maybe we can pick up a day 2 defensive tackle that can come in there and just, provide some depth or maybe be even a better fit if they're going to change the scheme up a little bit. And I think the same with Komisi. He's not I don't think he's an all-world player. I think he's had some decent moments, but strong side linebackers aren't that difficult to find, especially with Komisi's skill set. So I would think it'd make much more sense to, if you're going to free up cap space, to go that direction rather than, cut probably the only capable veteran corner we have on our team.
And that's my point, is that just I think of what the needs are right now. And I mean, right now, you can say in the secondary we have Rashad Jones and Brent Grimes. So we do have some good players there. But what do we have in the linebacker core? I mean, even Jelani Jenkins, he hasn't been a world beater either. He's been pretty good, but he hasn't been anybody that like we could look at and say, you know what, we need to really lock this guy down and say he needs to stick around for the next 5 or 6 years. He's not that kind of guy either. So my idea is that you keep Grimes around for one more year to be the number one corner. We hope and see if Vance Joseph or and the defensive backs coach. I don't think we did. We hire one of those yet? I don't think we did, but we hope that Vance Joseph can develop Bobby McCain and Tony Lippett into decent starting corners. Like whether Bobby's in the slot or in the boundary or Lippett the other way around, you know what I mean? That kind of idea. If he can make one of those guys develop into a good corner, then in 2017, after we've hopefully solved the middle linebacker problem, we will be able to draft a stud corner who can come in and start developing into the number one. No matter what, I can't see this defense being fixed in 1 year. There's just way too many holes, way too many gaps in talent. The depth problem is an absolutely horrendous issue. I mean, once you get past the starters, who even in most cases aren't even that good to begin with, once you get past like Ndamukong Suh and Grimes and Jones, it's like the starting lineup is really not that great. So you look at all that, and there's no way to be able to say this defense is going to be fixed in 1 year. It's going to take 2 or 3 years to fix. And I think the best strategy would be fix the linebacking core first. And then once it's time to move on from Grimes, you will have hopefully developed Bobby McCain and Tony Lippett into good starters. and not even great, just good, decent enough to that they can play. Like maybe on a Nolan Carroll level, even that would be an upgrade over whatever we've had to deal with before. And then you can kind of spend your time getting a stud corner in 2017. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of ways to solve this issue. I mean, you could do it in reverse if you wanted to go corner and then linebacker in 2017, but I've always thought that since I my newest the philosophy that I've decided to take on recently is that the reason it's called a linebacker core is because it's the core of the defense. It's we've seen how badly everything else functions when the linebackers are bad. When we had decent linebackers, the defense seemed to play pretty well. When the linebackers went down, things started to go awry. So
Well, one thing that's interesting, Lewis, is and it's going to be interesting in the drafts and free agency is Miami is in a situation right now where they can really go a lot of directions defensively, and so the question is, do you just decide we're going to be a 3-4 or we're going to be a 4-3? Because obviously, the coach, the defensive coordinator, has done extensive experience in both the 4-3 and the 3-4. And, the positions that get impacted more than anything, whether you run a 4-3 or 3-4, are the defensive ends and the linebackers. I mean, if you're a corner and you can cover, you're going to be playing in either defense. But if you're a linebacker, the real question comes down to who's our primary run defenders and who's our primary pass rushers. And Miami's in a scenario where they can go into the draft and they should be in the mindset that they're not looking necessarily to find this one or two players to plug into their scheme. They can go literally just get the best talented linebacker they can get, or they get the best talented defensive end they can get, and then they can, run a defense based on that talent versus having to have a scheme fit, as a lot of people like to say. So if they decide to go, Miles Jack, there's nothing wrong with then, beefing up the line and try to have the line be more of a primary, block eater up or a run stopper and letting your linebackers run. But the key to me is they got to stop settling. And the mistake Miami's made in free agency is they're settling for players that are somewhere in the neighborhood of average to above average from other teams. And I think the only way you get better is you got to be trying to look at getting your hands on players that are impactful players, players that make plays at key moments in the game, players that cause turnovers, players that make tackles for losses. And they just have been settling, in my mind, too much for players that aren't impact players.
but I think I don't know if you guys agree with me or not, but like I said, I really don't think this is a problem that can be fixed in 1 year. It's going to take a couple of years before the Dolphins defense can really be looked at and say, yeah, this is going to work out great. Would you agree?
No, in the NFL things can change dramatically, and
Yeah, I
I
know, but it's
think
like just thinking like just what on based on what we see now, just logically speaking, do you think it can happen? Not like, well, let's hope it does.
yeah, I think it can happen. I think the key in my mind is that they have got to basically look at the players that they have, and they're going to have to make some tough decisions on who they're keeping and not keeping. And I tweeted out today, I just don't think you can consider keeping Cameron Wake because he's in his 30s now. He's coming off a major injury, and his game really centers around his unbelievable quickness off the snap of the ball to beat linemen. And so now you've got a guy who's in his 30s. It's really questionable. Is he going to have that same explosion out of his stance after an Achilles injury? And right now he's scheduled to count against the cap almost 10 million, only of which about 1.4 is dead money. So if you just have Cameron Wake alone go, you're freeing up close. You're definitely freeing up about 8 to 9 million on your cap. And the same goes with Jordan Cameron. If you let him go, you're freeing up almost 7.5 million. And so if you're giving the Dolphins about $16 million in cap space to work with just those two players, you can drastically change your team quickly, in free agency if you bring players in that, like I said, that are impactful players and they don't just settle for players that aren't.
I don't know. I want to have your optimism, Chad, but it kind of feels like to me that we are we're kind of looking at the salary cap like it's a Madden game, and we can just pick anybody we want and they'll play good because we're in control. Good players in general don't come cheap. I mean, what kind of salary would you give somebody you're willing to let start at linebacker, tight end? 5 million, 6 million? And if you do that, then you've already sucked up 12 million of the 16 million dollars that you freed up. So suddenly you don't have any space anymore.
Yeah, I mean, to me, you have. This is just my opinion. I mean, it really comes down to how well your GM evaluates the talent, that's available. But I'm along the preference. I would rather pay a little bit more money to try to get a player that's definitely above average, and then try to use the draft to fill in the other spots rather than just bring in a guy. A good example is Bryce McCain. They brought Bryce McCain in. You get him. His cap number this coming year is 3.5 million, only which a million is dead. So you're paying him, 3 million a year roughly, and that's the price you're going to get for, in my mind, an average to backup corner. That's what Bryce McCain is. I don't know, in my mind, why are you paying a guy 3 million of your cap space when he's an average to backup corner? I think you're better off to try to go get a true starting cornerback that you can start on the outside all season long, and then just use your Bob McCain's and Tony Lippett's and rely on your coaches to develop those guys. I think bringing in these mid-level players are what's been hurting Miami for years.
Any thoughts, guys?
Um, I I think it'd be hard to fix the defense in 1 year. Um, it's possible. I don't think that taking a linebacker and a defensive tackle in the first couple rounds would preclude you though from taking a corner to start developing as well. Because I mean, this cornerback draft's really interesting because the top two guys, Mackenzie Alexander and Vernon Hargraves, are probably not guys that I would want to take. I like Alexander, and I think he's probably the best one in this draft. But I mean, I probably wouldn't put a top 10 pick into him. I think you're probably better off taking a day two guy and giving him 2016 to get a little bit of playing time, kind of mix him in, and then try to start him in 2017 after a year of kind of transforming his body and getting used to the NFL and working on his technique and such. But it's a pretty deep draft as far as day two guys, and I don't think that you're going to be forced to take anything particular in that round two, even in round one. I mean, again, it should be just about taking the best talent that's there, and I think there's a really good defensive talent available throughout this draft. It's more of a defensive draft than an offensive draft. So I think that you could walk away from this draft saying, okay, well, we got a linebacker, we got a cornerback, we got a defensive tackle. Then day three, we were able to add maybe another receiver, maybe a tight end, maybe an offensive tackle, um, maybe another linebacker, maybe a safety. So I think you can really walk away from this draft with some really good talent. I think that their biggest issue the last couple of years is just not being in tune with what the coaching staff needs. And hopefully now that these coaching changes have kind of fixed that disconnect between top to bottom.
I think one thing you're seeing reoccurring, whether who's talking, is that it's become more and more clear that for this year in this draft, it's become vital, I think, for Miami to build their defense in this draft. So I don't think who was that, Perkins this week, that would come out and they said they should draft the running back from Alabama. But
Oof, that was
I was
bad.
just saying, I don't think Miami can afford luxury picks in this draft. I mean, even at the quarterback position, or they obviously don't even need a wide receiver, but I don't think they can afford to take some high picks at guard or tight end or positions like that. They absolutely need to infuse the defense with athletic talent.
I don't understand where the running back thing came from. Obviously, they're just that's typical Sun Sentinel stuff, I guess. Throw stuff at the wall and see if it sticks. We have a caller in the room, so caller, reveal yourself. Hello. He's in the call. I guess he's just not in the mood to talk. So whenever you do feel like talking, caller person that I do not know, please feel free to speak up. In the meantime, it's actually pretty interesting. I have a feeling this is Keith, but I don't know why he's not talking. But actually, Ian, it's actually interesting that you said that you thought Mackenzie Alexander was the best, because during the film study that I had with Keith and Duke, I think we all agreed that it was actually Hargreaves who was a better prospect, just looking at his tape and and looking at what he's been able to do. So, would you mind sharing why you feel it's Alexander who's actually the better choice?
They're just kind of different players. I mean, if you're looking for a guy who can step in right away and play at like a decent level, Hargraves is your guy. He's not overly athletic. He's not fast. He's not explosive. As far as like leaping ability, he's a really tough. He's a feisty kid. He's plays the run very well, or at least hard. Um, but translating him to the NFL, you saw the issues really against Michigan. You saw some of the issues against some of the other marquee matchups that he had, which weren't many because they played a lot of off-man coverage. Well, the rule of thumb coming out of college is don't trust off-man cornerbacks because if you can't play on-man in college, you're probably not going to match up too well athletically in the NFL. And that was already an issue for him in college, is that he just wasn't a great athlete. That doesn't mean everything. Athleticism is only part of the key. It's not the entire answer. Otherwise, you'd see much better players that are amazing athletes. But there does need to be a mix, and there is a baseline. And I think he meets the baseline to be like a good starter as a cornerback. But I think the big difference between he and Alexander is that Alexander can line up over a wide receiver and smother him and legitimately take away the full route tree. He's got speed, he's got length, he's pretty tough. Um, the issues for him is more technique wise and more of experience wise. Whereas he's only a 2-year player coming out of Clemson, whereas Hargreaves has been playing for 3 seasons. And I think that you can tell that there are issues, that there are a difference there, especially technique wise. So I mean, it kind of depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for the high upside, maybe more of a risk, you'd look at Mackenzie Alexander, especially if you're playing man coverage. Like that's really the only thing that Alexander can do. He's not good in zone. He does not trust himself in zone coverage, and every defense plays a mixture of man and zone. So you're kind of gonna have to figure that out with Alexander, which is again why I probably wouldn't take him top 10. But Hargraves with him, it's just, are you going to be stuck with another Cortland Finnegan or like Brandon Flowers, which those would kind of be like my comparisons for him. You're going to get beat with him unless if you give him safety help, and it's just a matter of when, not really if. He's a good player. He's just not a great player, and I think that's probably my bigger concern. Is I'd just rather have more of the physical upside, and so that's kind of more just like a preference thing.
So there's nobody in this draft at corner that really wows you.
No, no. If Miami wanted to adjust the cornerback position, last year was the year to do it, and which I said for the entire offseason. So
Well, they drafted Tony Lippett, I guess, kind of, sort of. So I mean, hey,
yeah.
and Bobby. So you can't say they did nothing.
Well, first round. They needed to take one first round, but yeah.
Mm,
I like Bobby, but they
How
really
how did
needed
Trey
to take.
Wayne how did Trey Waynes do this year? I wasn't able to follow much of
Uh,
that.
meh,
I mean, I know he was
he didn't
meh,
play.
one at our pick, but
Yeah,
meh.
he just didn't play much. I think he played in like 2 or 3 games, something like that.
He was
oh, got it.
eh,
I mean,
okay, ish.
we all know how Marcus Peters did, but
Marcus Peters
Yeah,
was Defensive Player of the Year candidate, wasn't he? Or
yeah.
rookie? Yeah.
He
So,
uh,
he won.
yeah,
He won. Yeah.
I think he
oh, he
won
won the
one
rookie.
for
Oh, he won
Pro
it.
Football
Yeah.
for Pro Football Writers. I think the main awards are given out by the Associated Press Awards or whatever at the NFL Honors, but I think everyone would be very surprised if it wasn't Todd Gurley and Marcus Peters.
Gurley and Peters, I think, are the winners. And I guess it just goes to show you that Sam Madison knows what he's talking about. When he says that hips are most important and there's somebody saying that he has tight hips, that's a problem. So,
Have a question. We still have Ian here. Obviously, one of the things are the Dolphins have to look at with their current guys that have become, free agents or will become free agents, I should say, is, Lamar Miller and Olivier Vernon, and they're two players that I have a hard time personally trying to decide. You give those guys big second contracts, or are they guys that can we bring in a running back maybe in the third or fourth round of this draft to, replace Lamar Miller, or can we get a defensive end that will replace Olivier Vernon? And I just wanted to get your opinion on those two players specifically.
This will be kind of a franchise-defining moment this offseason, at least for the short term, because they have to decide whether they're going to go all in to win this season or whether they're going to kind of understand where they're at as far as a franchise. And I know that both these guys are young. especially Miller. Miller's definitely young. I mean, he's a guy with 4 years left in his prime. Um, Vernon's a guy. He's still probably got like 3 or 4 years left. So it's kind of an interesting spot. But it's, do you want to pay these guys, premier money for, what the top of the market's going to probably get for their positions? If they want to win right away, then they're probably going to need to make a pretty strong push on each. Lamar Miller, I think, is an elite running back. I think he put himself in that category this year. He's not at the very tippy top of that prism, but I think that he's right there. If you want to list guys off, I mean, the things he's developed into, the things that he does on a play-by-play basis is phenomenal. He is a tremendous running back, and if I'm him entering the free agent period, I'm not asking for anything less than $8 million a year. And so if you're Miami, you're saying, well, yeah, that's a lot of money for one running back. However, is that a lot of money for the combination of Jay Ajayi and Lamar Miller? Are you willing to pay $9 million for those two backs? All of a sudden, that's a lot more palatable. And if you're looking to win, you really want a guy like Lamar Miller, because unless if you're taking Ezekiel Elliott in the top 10, which it's probably pretty unlikely, and something I wouldn't advise as much as I love Ezekiel Elliott, I think you're better off re-signing Lamar Miller because he's going to be your best option for this year and next year. So, and then you just have to depend on, uh, are you just willing to, you know, it, and it's kind of a philosophical thing too, because if you're not re-signing those two guys, then you need to commit to not signing major free agents either, so that you can get those compensatory picks next year. Because you're probably going to get 2 third-round picks for those guys in 2017 if you let them go now and if you don't sign anybody to really replace them. So it's a big decision. It's are you kind of letting your two of your better young players go for draft picks, or which that's probably like the right team building thing to do. You really need to reinvigorate this roster with young talent, stay cheap, especially with the cap situation. But you're also going to waste away the prime years of Ryan Tannehill and Dominic Sue. So it's tough. And with Vernon, honestly, I don't want him back. If I'm Miami, I wouldn't even offer him a contract. Um, the contract offered and eventually signed by Derek Wolf, by Denver. It was like 4 years and 36 million. If that's a sign of things to come, Vernon's going to get like $12 million a year on the market, and there's no way in the world I would spend more than $8 million a year on a complimentary pass rusher like he is. He beat up on a lot of backup tackles down the stretch. He's still terrible against the run. He had like six uh, roughing the passer penalties, or unnecessary roughness penalties, because he went low on guys. So he's a dirty player. He made some just backbreaking decisions this year, and it's not worth the headache for a guy that needs Cameron Wake to be on the field to be really, really good. So for him, I would stay away from Miami. I wouldn't be surprised if they make a push for him. Um, he's like that Pro Football Focus darling this year, where I don't know why they think he was a good run defender, but he was getting trucked most possessions against the run. So eh, if I'm Miami, I stay away from him. But Miller, I think, is the guy that I think they should re-sign him. I understand if they don't, but again, if you want impact talent on your roster, you've got one. You've got like one of the better running backs in the NFL, definitely a top 8 running back right now, and you've got him for, if you can get him 4 more years, you've got him already 4 more, these 3 or 4 years, and he's played really, really well. So I would reward him with a nice new contract.
And it's not even that he has a lot of mileage on him. I mean, the fact that he hasn't been utilized the way we were hoping is proof that he's still practically only got like 2 years worth of mileage on him. We barely even use him as it is, and he's already been in the league for what, 4 years now, and he only got like 2 years of mileage. So for Lamar Miller, that would be pretty much to get like 4 million a year for him. I would think that is actually a pretty good deal, considering that Miller is really one of our best offensive weapons. I mean, even like Jarvis Landry, and you got Devontae Parker. If he continues to develop, hopefully he'll become somebody you can count on, like at least for like deep balls that can fight for the ball. That's something that, truth be told, I'm not sure which one I would want more, somebody who has great ability to like run routes, or somebody somebody who's just willing to fight the ball, because it always seems to be like the Dolphins pick these receivers that are really only good at one thing. Like Mike Wallace's one thing was that he could run down the fields really fast, but once you ask him to fight for the ball or chase or track the ball, nope, you got a problem. Devontae Parker can fight for the ball with the best of them, it looks like, but he's struggling with his routes. So I guess if I had to make a choice, I would hope that I had somebody who can fight for the ball. When you have somebody like Lamar Miller he's getting better at receiving. He is getting better at breaking tackles. He's a pretty good run blocker. He can find holes. He can break through. He can make explosive plays, and he doesn't even have that much mileage on him. I don't care if he's a linebacker. I don't care if he's a running back or not. What would you pay Jarvis Landry to stay on the team? That money I would be more than willing to give to Lamar Miller, because essentially Lamar Miller is the running back version of Jarvis Landry. He's just not as elusive.
I mean, the other thing is Adam Gase's offensive system. For all the talk about what he does with quarterbacks, there really is a lot of running in that system, and it is really reliant on being able to establish that. So I think it's going to be really important for him to have a consistent run threat. And while Ajayi was a great pick last year, I mean, we don't know how long we're going to have him for because of his injury concerns.
Well, we don't
But
even know
for
how
right
great
now,
he's going to be yet, Max. We don't even know how great he's going to be. I mean,
Well-
he showed flashes
well,
of
all we need
that.
him to do is get a little bit better, and then he's not a starter. That's what I was getting at. He's not going to be your number one running back. I think that in place of a big free agent signing this year, I think we bring back Lamar Miller, and we really need to do that for the sake of Adam Gase's front office and say we really need to make a push for Lamar Miller, because, like I said, for all the quarterback talk, there's a lot of running that system. We saw it a couple years ago with Denver when a few key players got hurt down the stretch, and they turned into a power running team. They started running the football like crazy with those guys up in Denver. And I mean, that was interesting to me looking back on, because you see that Gase can do that and is going to need Lamar Miller if he wants to do that. And I think Lamar Miller is going to get a lot of touches next season if he's back.
And speaking of quarterback talk, we're going to get into that in just a moment. Ian, if you'd like to stick around for just a little longer, we have some Ryan Tannehill to discuss. So that should be fun. Yay.
Yeah, I can do that real quick.
Yeah. So, but first we have another caller. Is this Keith?
This is.
There is Keith. Hello, Keith.
Hey, how's it going?
Not much. We just finished getting some draft talk in. It's actually kind of interesting because we were just discussing Ian. Like I was talking about how we had our first film session last week or so, and
Sure.
we thought that Vernon Hargreaves was the better choice at corner. It's actually kind of funny because Ian thinks that it's actually Alexander, and he just finished explaining exactly why that is. So, since you think it's Hargreaves, can we hear your reasoning as to it real quick before we go into Tannehill talk again?
Well, the issue with that is I haven't watched a ton of Alexander. I've only seen what we watched the past couple of weeks, but I just like the coverage ability. And right now, I'm a big fan of the fact that he covers a lot of bases. I like from what we watched, there was a healthy amount of off man there. I liked watching him play closer to the line of scrimmage. I was actually a fan of when they blitzed him too. There's definite refinement needed. Anyone who watched that Citrus Bowl game against Michigan knows that. Like, he hit an incredibly rough out, and to the point where you get people sitting there talking about how it was going to poo-poo his draft stock, and I don't see that. I think after the workout, most of that will be forgotten. But I like the polish that you see there. You'll see it more so, I think, at the next level too. But yeah, in terms of comparison with Alexander, I haven't watched nearly as much of Alexander as I have Hargrave, so it would be unfair for me to sit there and be like, well, this is why this guy is easily the better product. I just know that what I watched from Hargrave, I was a total fan.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, you can make your own. We'll probably go into this a little more next week, but since we have to talk about this, since it's become a topic of discussion, and it's been a while since we had a nice, healthy quarterback discussion, don't you think, guys? So let's talk about Ryan Tannehill. So Armando Salguero, of the Miami Herald, for the past week or so, has been putting out a bunch of articles, essentially airing out more and more dirty laundry in the Miami Dolphins organization. His sources saying that Joe Philbin had no confidence in Ryan Tannehill, and then now we found out that Joe Philbin essentially influenced Bill Lazor into not liking Ryan Tannehill initially, and so that made Lazor not want to give him any kind of power over the offense. And Tannehill did not like Lazor, and Lazor did not like Tannehill, and Philbin wanted Derek Carr, and he only said something like a week before the draft, after months of the front office actually preparing for the draft. It was a mess. It was just an overall complete, utter mess, and somehow it all revolved around the fact that Joe Philbin didn't believe in Ryan Tannehill, and Ryan Tannehill did not feel like the coaching staff had his back, which now apparently is the truth. As you can ask why all you want, the simple fact is they didn't, and it seems like every other quarterback in the league, to some extent, has the backing of their front office and their coaching staff. I mean, you look at Ryan Fitzpatrick, you look at Andy Dalton, you look at Joe Flacco, all of these guys, you're not hearing how the coaching staff just doesn't believe in them. This is the only team that I can think of other than the Cleveland Browns and Johnny Manziel, and people know that Johnny Manziel is definitely nothing to write home about unless you're looking to uh, see if you can turn him around again, because he seems to have issues beyond just football. So I'm gonna ask you guys for a reaction, and Ian, I want you to go first.
Yeah, it's such a weird story. Like it's so strange to me that like Joe Philbin would just give up on this quarterback that quickly, and then not only to do it for in his entering his third year, and then to do it for Derek Carr. Like it's such a weird player for this to come out about because Carr's really been like the exact same guy as Tannehill. So I'm not really sure like what the benefit is of releasing this information. Like clearly this was someone on Philbin's side, I think, that leaked this, but I'm not sure like what the upside of this leak is. So the leak is that you wanted a guy that's pretty similar to Tannehill. Like then why would you give up on Tannehill like that quickly? Like it just didn't make much sense to me. And then obviously like the timing that we heard from Salguero, like just a couple days before the draft, it's all so bizarre. It's drama. It's bitter drama, and it keeps coming out. And we've seen it with Louis Riddick, who's really close with Bill Lazor. He's been crying tears since Lazor was fired, throwing shade at the Dolphins organization and hiring process and Ryan Tannehill, and we're now seeing it, from Philbin's camp, I believe, with the Derek Carr story, and it's really just it's it's just crazy. It's just dumb. It's really dumb, dramatic stuff that doesn't add up. It's like it'd be one thing if they were saying like, oh yeah, like we were going to trade for Drew Brees, but ownership didn't want us to give up on Ryan Tannehill. Like that'd be one story if that was true, but it's not the case here. Like we're talking about a guy who pretty much mirrored Tannehill's 2014 season, except for he did it 1 year before. In terms of his development than what Tannehill actually did. So it's just really strange to me, and it doesn't make sense.
But it's not surprising.
No, it's not
It's also
surprising.
not
Yeah,
surprising.
it's not surprising because the organization under that regime was a joke, and stuff
Right.
leaked constantly from that coaching staff, especially Lazor.
And that's the only way. That's the only way. You're right. It was a joke, and at that point, you're entirely right. That was my first thought when I saw it. Like, I mean, it's a leak that doesn't help anyone involved, except for maybe Ryan Tannehill. The only person it might help is Ryan Tannehill, but the leak probably didn't come from Ryan Tannehill, so we're
Right.
back to square one. But it's so we're talking about a situation where Joe Philbin leaked information that he basically wanted to draft Ryan Tannehill after he drafted Ryan Tannehill, and that the organization wouldn't let him. And the only fact that I would question
I don't even know,
would be
Max.
that
I don't even know if Max. Hang on. I don't even know if it was the fact that they wouldn't let him. I mean, but they had been planning the draft for months, and then he only talked up, and then he only said something like a week before.
That's what
That's
I'm
way
getting
too
to. I don't
short.
think that's. I don't necessarily know that that's. I don't know what is true and what isn't for sure. But if I had to look at the story and someone told me one part isn't true, that's the part I would pick, because that just seems very strange. But
It's Joe
it
Philbin.
wouldn't surprise me if the Miami Dolphins hadn't met with their head coach and talked about what he wanted in the draft, or that Philbin had changed his mind. There's no level of dysfunction from the last 4 years that would be surprising to me in any way, shape, or form. Like, I mean, they could have told me that they brought in like Mike Tannenbaum's dog to work on Mondays, and he like barked once for Ryan Tannehill and barked twice for Derek Carr, and that was the decision. I have no idea, but I mean, it's
You cut out there for a second.
I was just saying nothing would surprise me about how dysfunctional it got there.
Yeah, that's and
Well,
go ahead.
I was gonna say this. I mean, the sad thing is, with all this information coming out over the past couple of weeks, it really just serves to reinforce everything we suspected about this regime with it. I mean, the 4 years Philbin was there, and I mean, a lot of the proof came out. And I mean, whatever happened with the locker room issues, I mean, the inability to control it, the fact that he feigned complete ignorance when any sort of locker room thing came up. I mean, I don't know how serious it really was. I'm not sure the reality of that, but he just never appeared to really have a grasp on what this team needed. It never had an identity, in my opinion, which is I feel when they brought him over from Green Bay, that was the number one thing they were looking for. They wanted that Green Bay type of really a guy who comes off the McCarthy coaching tree like that sort of a smart, sometimes aggressive offense. And I mean, you just never really saw it there. I mean, and then it comes out. Some of the more troubling things I've seen with Philbin in hindsight, when they asked him about his strengths and what he did with the Packers, it was preparing and running team meetings. And he said one of his biggest concerns was making sure that there were no typos in his PowerPoint. I mean, when that comes out and you're thinking, I'm not sure that that's really going to make you a viable coaching candidate. So I'd like to know what that interview was like between Ross, Ireland, and Philbin in early 2012, perhaps even earlier than that. So, but all these things come out, and it's frustrating. And I mean, the car thing, I mean, is kind of the tip of the iceberg. I always thought that he should have been probably canned when hang on a second. I'm in the car right now. I'm trying to weed around people. Don't worry, it's hands free.
Don't crash on us, Keith. We don't need to find out that you died on the show.
But I was ready to move on from him when he had to pretty much be forced into getting rid of Mike Sherman, when it was clear that Mike Sherman and Ryan Tannehill, it was just that relationship just wasn't going to work anymore. And then so that had to be forced. And at that point you think, well, I mean, there's just that lack of flexibility. There's an almost unwillingness to adapt and do what's necessary to take the next step forward. So at that point, I mean, he's just, in my opinion, not the right guy, not the coach that they needed in Miami. And I mean, it's gone on, and now it's the lack of faith in Tannehill, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, he took the ball out of Tannehill's hands essentially on that last drive against Green Bay in 2014. I mean, that's a drive where if you trust your quarterback, you go out there and you believe that, I mean, you're obviously going to run the ball, but if he needs to throw it on third down or you need to surprise him with something earlier, you're confident in him making that throw. And there was just a complete lack of confidence there. They completely handcuffed him. He wasn't expected, I mean, not even allowed to audible. And so then people get frustrated because they don't understand why he's sitting in the line of scrimmage and he's not seeing everything he should. Well, so, I mean, I've asked people about this before because you have the camps out there that just want Tannehill gone now, like franchise quarterback grow on trees, and we'll just go back to the well and find another one. There's a cliche going in there. But, I mean, the reality is with Ryan Tannehill, I don't know that any quarterback would have succeeded, coached and developed in the Philbin regime. I mean, you look at any great quarterback, any stable quarterback in the NFL, and there's typically a great coach or a great offensive mind or someone behind him, and it's a long-term presence. I mean, you can't have a ton of turnover at that position and expect it to be okay. I mean, if you got Bill Belichick, I mean, and you got that relationship with Tom Brady up there, even though Belichick had him working with Charlie Weiss early on, and you had that turnover at the offensive coordinator position. The thing is, I mean, you have that head coach there, you have that presence, you have a stability in a relationship, and I mean, it's just you're never going to get that in Miami if you keep putting your quarterback in these positions where, I mean, it's turnover. They don't know who their offensive coordinator is. I'm working with this guy now. It's just, I mean, it's a mess. So you need to see stability there. And I mean, I'm not sorry to see Philbin go. I couldn't believe Laser and Coyle going back to Cincinnati. I felt bad. I didn't mean to sound smarmy about it either, but I saw the tweet yesterday that Laser's quarterback coach and Coyle's back to coaching defensive back out there, and I was just like, you guys have my deepest condolences. I feel terrible for you.
One thing I'll say on the report is that to me it's like having you break up with a girl and now all of a sudden she's talking bad about you. So that just makes you feel happy you did it. That's about all I got to say about that part of it. But the one thing I wanted to ask Ian while I still had him here is you make a good point, Keith, and I've been saying this all along. People say we need to get rid of Tannehill. I'm like, well, you don't just get rid of Ryan Tannehill and not have a quarterback. Tannehill clearly is your quarterback going into next year. He clearly still has upside, and he isn't a quarterback that's just going out there and losing football games. He may not be the next, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning type quarterback, but I still feel he's better than at the bottom of the league right now for teams that desperately need quarterbacks. However, with that being said, I don't think that it's necessarily a bad idea to consider a plan B for Ryan Tannehill, and that
Absolutely not.
essentially would mean it may be time to let Matt Moore go. They've had Matt Moore in here, I think, the backup, a highly paid backup, and the reason is Tannehill was young, and you want to have a veteran quarterback that can come in if he gets hurt. But I guess my question to Ian is: there any scenario that you would consider taking a quarterback in the first round, knowing that after this year it is feasible? Ryan Tannehill doesn't have a massively guaranteed contract. And so, if Tannehill doesn't work out next year, would you consider bringing a rookie in this year just as a plan B scenario?
Oh boy.
No, I don't think I would.
Thank
They've
God.
got Logan Thomas on the roster. I think
Oscar loves him. Ian, can you explain that to me a little bit?
So I actually like him too. I mean, if you're going to take a high upside guy, then you take a high upside guy. I don't see the upside of taking a guy that's like Kirk Cousins, for example. Like Kirk Cousins ended up being like a moderate starter. Okay, whatever.
I bet you he's Nick Foles. He's going to be really good, and then he's going to fall back to earth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because if you look at what they did, a lot of it was, dump offs and stuff. But nevertheless, I think that it's fine to take like that high upside guy in like the middle rounds of the draft, and Miami essentially got that guy for free. And it kind of depends on what they saw in practice and what their scouts saw, and if they believe in him as a mid-round guy, then you can kind of count him as like an extra draft pick as your developmental upside guy. And really, what it comes down to is why would you take a third or fourth round quarterback unless if you really feel strongly about one of those mid-round quarterbacks, when the reality is if Tannehill doesn't work out this year, or if he's just not to Adam Gase's liking for whatever reason, then you could just take one next year. There's nothing to say that you need to start a guy that's been in the system a year if there's a better talented or a more talented player available next year, which is very possible. I mean, we don't know who's going to rise. We don't know who's going to fall. Guy that's emerged. I mean, just look at Paxton Lynch. He emerged. I mean, some people believe out of nowhere this year. Carson Wentz, for the love of God, has thrown 600 passes in his career, and people are already writing him down as a top 5 pick, which is insane. But so I mean, if they really don't like Tannehill after 2016, they can easily cut bait and just draft a starter in the first round or second round if they really want to next year. I don't think that you need to force a second or third or fourth round pick this year because that person's not going to help you in 2016. And that's really the goal is, I mean, who's going to help you win now and later? I just don't think they're going to have really any chances to do that. I mean, this roster needs help all over. Even if you're going to draft a rookie quarterback now, they're going to walk into a similar situation as Ryan Tannehill. And that would be a failing situation. I mean, the Dolphins have literally been one of just a small handful of teams. The Minnesota Vikings would be another similar team where they've pretty much failed their quarterback, their young quarterback, Every other team that has taken a quarterback highly in the last 4 or 5 years has done everything possible to surround them with a lot of weapons on offense, except for the Dolphins and Vikings. So, and the Vikings
And
are obviously winning, but I mean, they
and
also have,
they have Adrian Peterson to be their workhorse, so it's a
right.
different situation.
Right, so they already had him, and they also have an amazing defense and a great coaching staff in place. So it's basically the complete opposite of the Dolphins. So I think that you're going to see a better Tannehill in 2016. I mean, he was the same guy in 2015 as he was 2014. His stats just didn't really look better. So I mean, yeah, it's not the growth that everyone wanted, but we still need to understand that this is still a guy that, as at worst, in the worst possible scenarios that could have possibly happened, he was a league average quarterback. I mean, yeah, you want more out of him. Of course, you want a great quarterback, but I think that you owe it to the organization and also to Tannehill, and also to the health of the franchise to see what he can be with a much better situation.
And somebody who knows how to utilize him properly. That last game against the Patriots, Ian, I would think that we found, hey, look, here's what can happen when you use Ryan Tannehill to his fullest potential.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it's stuff that we saw glimpses of it even in the laser era, and it just 2015 though it just a lot of it disappeared, and it just did not make sense. And there's just a lot of things that didn't make sense in the last couple of years.
Really, what the offense looked like in 2015 was boring. And that's exactly what Mike Sherman's offense was before we gave him the boot. So
I wish it were boring, Lewis. I just thought it was foolish, the offense. I mean, I thought the passing routes that Laser had, where he was putting the receivers, it didn't make sense to me. I could probably at a high school level put a zone defense out there and cover four receivers with two guys the way he was running them all together.
Okay, but wait,
And
let me ask a question, Chad, before you continue. And actually, I'm going to direct this to you too, Ian, and anybody else who has any insight on this. Did Laser's offense change from 2014 to 2015? Because in 2014 it worked, and in 2015 we're saying how it's awful.
honestly, I think the biggest change, Lewis, is I think for both Chip Kelly and Bill Lazor, I think teams have kind of got the read option figured out a little bit better. I think they've kind of figured out how to defend it. And I think that's the reason both Miami and Philadelphia struggled somewhat offensively this year is that teams have a better grip on how to defend that offense. And so they needed to get innovative and do some other things. And I think both teams, Joe Philbin and Bill Lazor combined, along with Chip Kelly, I think they're so blinded that they feel it's their system that's been successful more so than the players that they have. And so I thought that the creativity on Miami's offense was at an all-time low. I think the read option wasn't something they could lean on, and I don't think they knew where to go from there.
I don't think either offense really tried to use read option at all. I think that's actually a problem with Miami is they never sold the read option.
Yeah, it was never a real
Tannehill was
thing.
never a reading. Yeah, and Chip Kelly actually changed his offense to kind of get away from the read option. Is there was no running threat there in that offense. So I mean, Kelly's was really weird, and that's kind of maybe like for another discussion. But he dramatically changed from 2015 to 2014, and even especially 2013. But so for Miami, I mean, it got even more bland. Everything was a short route, unless if they got down one or two, three scores, and then they would just randomly kind of take deep shots. The flow of the game, the progression of the game got bizarre. They would always start with these short passes, and it would force defenses up in um, to crunch the box. And Miami just kept trying to do like the same three or four routes constantly. And that was a change from 2014, where there was a little bit more creativity, there was a little bit more game flow, and there was definitely a better run to pass balance. I mean, it was so severe in 2014. By the time Laser was fired, they were throwing the ball almost 70% of the time. And it doesn't make any sense. It never makes sense to do that. Even with a guy like Tom Brady, you don't really want to be doing that. Although he's probably the only guy that could really pull that off in the NFL. So, why it happened, I have no idea. Schematically, it was just a complete mess, and it was a little bit better in 2014. There were still spacing issues, but the play calling itself was better, and as far as situational, and especially balance wise, it was still not good last year, but it was much better. So it just culminated into a huge disaster.
I struggle to think about why these things happen. I mean, it really does blow my mind how I don't even want to use I can't even think of a proper word for it. Dumb, just plain dumb. What they've done, what they did was they literally took something that worked and spit all over it and said, "Screw this, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to try this instead." And then when it failed, they didn't go back to what was actually working. I I have no words. I have none. I can't even. I'm rambling because I can't think of a proper word to express exactly how I feel about this. Ryan Tannehill, every time we see this flash of greatness from Ryan Tannehill, it's because he was in a position where his ability was going to be used in a way that it was going to bring out the best in him. His ability to run and run away, his ability to run to throw on the run, his ability to scramble out of the pocket, something that they literally coached out of him. That's something we found out about just late in the season. I mean, and of course, there's a whole issue with the balance. It seemed like the balance was just getting worse and worse and worse. I have Duke messaging me on my Twitter, and he's listening to the show. Aaron Rodgers had 5 games with 70% pass to run ratio since 2012. He didn't win any of them, and Tannehill had 5 this year. So literally, what we're having here is that. So this man, Joe Philbin, who does not believe in Ryan Tannehill, and now Dan Campbell, who apparently also doesn't believe in Ryan Tannehill for some reason, decides that we're just going to throw the ball 70% of the time all year long. How that doesn't even make sense. If you don't believe in your quarterback, A, you bench him, or B, you don't use him as much. So the logical explanation is to use him more. Why? Are you trying to punish him for not being good enough? Are you trying to make sure that he hurts so badly that he decides to retire, or he says, "Please get me out of Miami before my life is put in danger"? I don't understand the logic behind any of this stuff. I really just it baffles me, guys. I have no words.
I think everybody kind of was with the offense they ran, Lewis. I mean, I'm just guessing, but when those games you're talking about Aaron Rodgers, when those quarterbacks are throwing that huge discrepancy in pass to run, typically the reason those are losing games is the reason they're doing that is they're behind a ways, and so they're being forced to have to try to score quickly, and so they're throwing the football. But Miami was doing it when it was just astounding that they would have success running the football, and they would literally go 2 or 3 series and almost go away from it completely. And Ian did a great job of covering uh, what he thought of Lamar Miller's talent level. And, to not even go games where you hardly even use him as a threat. I'd never seen anything like it. It's one thing if you've tried to run the ball, 7 or 8 times and haven't gained a yard or two and you're just getting stuffed. But they had games where he was literally ripping off some decent looking runs and they would just pretty much forget he was even on the team, for a whole half of football. It was just mind boggling. It really was.
And it's that kind of thing that just makes me wonder why how who does it help for you to do this to yourself? If you're a coach and you're worried about your job and you really don't like this guy, then don't use him as much. Coaches don't get to keep their jobs by removing a problem by trying to punish the guy. Like, and it's not even about benching him. Like benching Tannehill would have been a much better punishment and a much more fitting one if you really didn't believe in him than leaving him out there, letting him pretty much die out there from getting pounded on all the time. If you didn't believe in Ryan Tannehill, you should have benched him. That's all I'm going to say. Whether we think it was the right move or not, if you really didn't believe in Ryan Tannehill, you bench him. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. If you don't think he's good enough, put Matt Moore in there and draft your guy next year. That's all there is to it. But why didn't Joe Philbin do that? Why didn't Dan Campbell do that? I don't know. I have no idea.
Well, have you ever seen a more passive-aggressive coaching staff ever? I mean, just like all the details that have come out, and even when he was there, I mean, just like the lack of eye contact or his inability to really direct his words at people. So, I mean, I'm not surprised by any of this. I mean, the manner in which he carried himself when he was there is really right in line with the behavior that is, I guess you'd say, leaking out to the media now. But, I mean, that's just, you can't have that on a football team. I mean, you need that direct line of communication. And I don't think, I mean, I never thought that Philbin was going to be the guy to do that. I mean, I'm sorry it worked out that way. I've heard he's a nice guy. I mean, outside of a football organization, but I mean, it did no one any good. And honestly, I get the Tannehill apologist term for saying this. They'll say it anyway. The fact that Ryan Tannehill is not physically and mentally destroyed by what has transpired the past 4 years, I think is a testament to how good he can be. I mean, that takes resilience that I don't think most NFL quarterbacks have. A lot of kids, I'll say a kid, even though he's in his mid to later 20s at this point. But a lot of people, I mean, look at David Carr in Houston, just taking that constant beating, getting no help, seeing nothing for the effort, and just getting pounded on with these expectations rising because he was the number 1 overall pick. I mean, it in a lot of ways just broke him in terms of being a capable starter in the NFL. I think that Ryan Tannehill is, I mean, I would absolutely roll forward with him. I don't think he's damaged goods. I don't think that there's been any sort of compromise in his skills going forward. I mean, you mentioned that game in Week 17. Watching him throw the ball downfield, there are obvious gifts he has throwing the football. I mean, you've always had people say, well, he was a wide receiver. He was a quarterback playing wide receiver for a little while. He's going to quarterback meetings still. Who cares? But, I mean, he throws the football well. I mean, he displays things that you really don't see in a lot of quarterbacks who are winners. So, I mean, you need the right guy to put it together, which is why, I was thrilled when Gase came through. I know that there's that hesitance and suspicion regarding his inexperience, but I mean, I just think that this is the right situation for him because I think he can be very good. I don't think he's going to be elite, but I mean, what is elite at this point? I mean, I tweeted out that thing yesterday that since 2003, only 4 quarterbacks have won the AFC, and it's really 3 with Joe Flacco thrown in for good measure. So I mean, it's not like Ryan Tannehill is one of the few quarterbacks in the AFC who isn't eating at the big boys table right now. It's Manning, Brady, Roethlisberger, and then, a little dash of unibrow. But, I mean, so you're going to see a change in the guard coming up here in a little bit. And, I mean, if you're the Dolphins and you believe in this guy, which I think they should, and judging by their hire and everything they've said thus far, they're going to move forward and try to make the most of the situation. But with this, Manning's, you assume that Manning's pretty close to done. Brady's in his late 30s. Roethlisberger, I think, is going to continue to play well for a while. But, I mean, you're going to see that change now. And, I mean, it's going to be something where you can get in on. You can become one of the premier teams in the AFC if you got a quarterback you can roll with. And I think this is a guy where, I mean, they're going to try like hell to do it. And I think, personally, I like their chances. That's not even a bias.
The definition of elite has been watered down. It really has. I mean, you're looking at the guys that are being called elite now. Cam Newton is pretty close. I don't think there's really much more Cam Newton can do to prove himself in order to be in that category. I think Cam Newton's pretty darn close to being in that elite category if he's not already. But then I hear names like Russell Wilson. I mean, did anybody not see how badly Russell Wilson played? And then suddenly he just maybe he just flipped the switch later on, but that doesn't erase what he did later. That's like looking at Tim Tebow and saying, well, his first 3 quarters were awful, but he came back in the 4th quarter and won. So, hello, his first 3 quarters were still terrible. That doesn't erase the fact that he did terribly. So, and then you look at Russell Wilson. Well, he came back and won in the 4th quarter, but in this case, in the playoffs, he didn't. So I digress. But it's like you don't erase stuff. Wins do not erase the total product. If Ryan Tannehill had been a playoff contender, I still wouldn't think any higher or any lower than what I think of him right now, because the full product, the entire thing on film, does not go away because they won or lost. It really doesn't. If Aaron Rodgers, how close did the Packers come to losing so many of these games? And everybody was looking at Aaron Rodgers, thinking, well, what's wrong with Aaron Rodgers? Hello, his entire team fell apart. It's not enough to have. The quarterback alone is not enough. You need to be able to put them in a position to succeed. You need to, and we all know Aaron Rodgers is one of the elites in the league. So if he's losing, does that mean he's suddenly not elite anymore? Anybody who said that would be out of their mind. Wins do not qualify an elite quarterback. Somebody said, who was it that said that? Was it Max? No, it was some guy named Meta something or other. He's a New York beat writer, I think. He said that Ryan Fitzpatrick should be considered for the MVP discussion. In whose world is Ryan Fitzpatrick worthy of an MVP? Like,
In New
really?
York.
In New York.
That's about it.
And
In New York, that's
only to
about
this
it.
and only to that guy, because even the New Yorkers are like, dude, are you playing a joke on us? You're kidding, right? So you look at that and you say, what is elite anymore? Is it wins? Is it the statistics? I don't know what elite means anymore. All I know is that Tom Brady and maybe Cam Newton are still the elite quarterbacks in the NFL. I don't even think Peyton is considered elite anymore because his arm is just degraded so much that he's just not in that category anymore. Big Ben is really, really good, but he's not elite because he doesn't like dominate games all the time. There have been a lot of points where Big Ben just kind of makes a really stupid mistake and you just kind of find yourself scratching your head and thinking, what was he thinking? So elite quarterbacks don't make those kinds of mistakes. You rarely ever see Brady do stuff like that Big Ben does. And I'm going to say this about Big Ben Roethlisberger and Ryan Tannehill, by the way. Big Ben gets knocked down, gets hurt, and then gets back up. Ryan Tannehill gets hurt, or rather, he doesn't get hurt. So really, who is the tougher guy here? The guy who gets hurt and plays through it, or the guy who manages to get hit as much as he does and pretty much acts like he doesn't feel it? So I will
What's the
say
miracle
that.
he's not in a wheelchair? I mean, just some of the hits that Ryan Tannehill has taken have just been absolutely brutal. And outside of the fact that his first season at the Meadowlands when he landed awkwardly, and I think it was like he hyperextended his knee, and he was out the rest of that game, and then Matt Moore played. I mean, aside from that, I mean, he's just been an absolute workhorse. So the thing about the elite quarterback, the misconception at this point, I feel like when we'll say people on the internet because I mean, sure, and I mean people in the media too. When you throw out the term elite, it's like it's supposed to mean never makes a mistake or flawless. And I mean, even the winning quarterbacks, even the guys that we love to watch in the NFL, make mistakes. I mean, Aaron Rodgers probably makes the fewest mistakes, but I mean, to your point with the offensive line, notice that I mean he gets sacked 8 times in Arizona 3 weeks ago. He goes back in there on Saturday night, and they pretty much don't even touch him because he's got Bakhtiari and Bulaga back as his bookend tackles. You know, those guys played great in that game. But, I mean, if you look at Cam, I mean, Cam still throws too many fastballs, in my opinion. I would hate to be a receiver for that guy because, I mean, he has such an incredibly strong arm that some of those throws looks like he's just going to blow holes through people. Russell Wilson in that first half, you could tell that Carolina watched the tape from Minnesota and noticed in that game he was getting away with when he was getting wrapped up behind the line of scrimmage. He was looking to get rid of the ball and wasn't really keen on taking the sack. And, I mean, that first pick six he threw, I mean, he tried to throw the ball away, and you could tell that Kuechly was just waiting for it. So, I mean, even the greats are making mistakes here. And I feel that if people saw Ryan Tannehill throw that pick six the way that Russell Wilson did on Sunday, they'd kill him and just say, like, oh, the same old Ryan Tannehill. But, I mean, like, everyone is prone to these gaffes. And, I mean, I keep coming back to the fact that, I mean, in my opinion, he's got some rare tools. I mean, he's an incredible athlete. I love the way he throws the ball, and everyone harped on him for not being able to throw the ball downfield. Notice he gets someone like Devontae Parker with an excellent catch radius, and something that's not a big deal. And then people are like, well, it was a bad...
And Keith, he didn't even get that until later in the season. Even before Parker showed up, he was doing pretty good.
I love it when he throws to Landry deep. Stills. I mean, like, and then you get people saying, well, it wasn't directly on the money. Well, who cares? It was a completion. I mean, as long as you didn't hang your receiver out to dry, you didn't get him hurt, you didn't get him undercut, and I mean, he's able to make that completion. It doesn't matter. And I mean, you notice that it seemed like the guy, and we've talked about this on all of our podcasts over the past couple of years. I don't know what kind of mental block he had with Mike Wallace, but it was certainly there because he just didn't. It's the confidence. Really, it's just that lack of confidence in throwing the ball to him and feeling that he's not going to make enough of an effort to go ahead and scrub out any gray areas that might be in the accuracy of the ball, the timing, whatever. I mean, with Devontae Parker, I mean, that guy's a walking eraser. It doesn't matter. I mean, that guy will take care of it. I mean, that's a big reason why they brought him in. I mean, Jarvis has been great with that too. But, I mean, it's all about confidence. And to be honest with you, I think that what comes down to Ryan Tannehill this season versus last season, just less confidence. And, I mean, you can hardly blame him. I'm not saying it's all the coaching staff's fault, but why else are they there? I mean, if you're not able to really get this guy up, and I mean, like, it's still development. I mean, that was the number one thing about this guy when he came in the draft 4 years. Well, now it's 4 years ago, is a project. Someone who needed to be properly coached and developed. The fact that he fell into Philbin's grips and is where he is today and isn't completely destroyed is amazing. And I don't think enough people appreciate that. The fact that, that guy's still standing. I mean, a lot of people would fold. The only other guy I can think of who takes that kind of punishment that often and is still walking for it is Jay Cutler, which, I mean, Adam Gase, I think, can appreciate that.
Roethlisberger for a few years. Roethlisberger took some shots for a few years there. I mean, they rebuilt that offensive line with David DeCastro and Marquise Pouncey. But, yeah, I was seeing a list. Roethlisberger has taken 100 more sacks than Peyton Manning, and he's been playing for like 5 fewer seasons. Or like 6.
I think a big reason for that, too, is for a while there, Roethlisberger's game was built on the fact that, I mean, he could throw the ball downfield even when he had people hanging off of him, which was kind of a novel approach at the time.
He holds on
to
the ball.
Yeah, but I mean, another thing with Pittsburgh is that while they've had Ben's taken a lot of shots, they've had just an incredibly bad run of health on their offensive line. I mean, Marquise Pouncey is never healthy. Their tackles, I mean, are typically a walking infirmary. I mean, that was the case this year. I mean, they were out all of their starting guys. I think they went from, Beecham to Villanueva on the left side. They drafted David DeCastro, and he gets hurt in the preseason. I mean, a couple of years ago, he turned out to be a pretty good tackle, excellent tackle. But yeah, I mean, it's just, these guys have taken a beating, and I mean, Ryan's up there. What's the sack total? Is it 183 now?
Yes.
Ridiculous. That is an absolute beating. And I mean, you have people out there say, well, he just holds the ball too long.
So
well, I can assure you, all 183 of those sacks, not to mention all of the hits and pressures that he's received, are not purely the fact that he hangs on to the ball too long.
The other thing is he doesn't have receivers that are getting open that easily, because Mike Wallace never got open unless it was just running straight down the field, and then you need time to let it develop. Jarvis Landry, it's really all about ball placement, because he doesn't necessarily get a ton of separation. He just fights for the ball. And Devontae Parker, same thing. He doesn't get a ton of separation. He just fights for the ball. So it's not like Tannehill has receivers who are getting crazy releases off the line.
That was supposed to be Greg Jennings' role.
Emmanuel Sanders. Like a guy like Emmanuel Sanders, who gets off the line quickly and can get open. Or a guy like Keenan Allen in San Diego does it. He will shake off a corner right off the line and be wide open for his quarterback to throw in an easy pass. And San Diego is like us because their offensive line is always just decimated. So their offensive line ends up as bad as ours, but they have that guy that Phillip Rivers can easily dump the ball down to with Antonio Gates. They make it easy for their quarterback, and Rivers is going to throw for 300 yards anyway because he's probably one of the most underrated players in the league. But
he took a beating this year too.
Huh? Yeah, he took a beating because they had what?
The depleted offensive line out there?
All 5 of starting offensive linemen from the season opener were gone by the end of the season. At one point, they had none of the 5 starters that they started the season with. And so he just takes a beating and he's just tough as nails. And so is Tannehill. I mean, we remember when the report came out that he had blood in his urine heading into a meaningless last game of the season after taking that beating. I think Tannehill, I can't remember a game that he hasn't gotten sacked in. It's possible that he's gotten sacked in every game of his career.
At least
maybe
twice.
2 or right. Well, maybe I think there's got to be at least a couple games where he got sacked once, and then maybe 1 or 2 where he didn't get sacked. Maybe the Houston game from last year, I don't remember. But there's got to be one. But I mean, I'm sure this is way too much number crunching for me to do, but I doubt there's a quarterback who's gone this long into their career without having a game where they don't get sacked. I mean, it's remarkable. It's it's mind-boggling that they don't do more things to help him because the route concepts are so bad. I don't know that they can. That's the biggest thing that I'm excited for with Adam Gase. He knows exactly how to clear out space and leave open room for a quarterback. That offensive line was not good in Chicago, but he was able to make them a top 10 offense on third down because the quarterback has to identify the blitz. They clear out the flat with another route, novel concept for the Dolphins coaching staff, using one route to clear out another. And then the quarterback has an easy job. It's going to be easier. Everything's going to get easier for him if he can do that preparation work during the week and be able to identify. And I think
Max just kind of.
there was another time.
You kind of cut it. You keep cutting out there, Max. Can you repeat what you just said, please?
Yeah, I was saying that it's going to be the important part is for Tannehill to be able to audible and get to the line of scrimmage and identify it. He'll be able to audible. He will have the authority at the line of scrimmage in Adam Gates' offense. And it's just going to be a matter of how prepared he is and how he can identify the blitzes. Because if you can identify the blitz in Adam Gase's offense, you're going to pick up the yards you need in every situation. Adam Gase is brilliant at calling plays for the right situation. He doesn't call, a thing where Tannehill dumps it down into the flat on 3rd and 8. He knows that he has to clear out a corner route with a deep route and make it work. He understands that. It's not, every route functions with every other route. They don't work in a vacuum. And that's something that I think is going to make Tannehill's job a lot easier when he's under duress.
Well, one of the major criticisms of Gase right now is that because he was able to get Jay's interception total. It was 8 until the last game of the season, and then he threw 3, and I think the previous season he threw 18 or something. But the other numbers were pretty much right in line with what Jay Cutler's done the past few seasons in Chicago. But what people don't realize is, the Bears skill position players was walking infirmary this year too. Forte was out all the time.
Games. They only had 2 or 3 games where they had Forte, Alshon Jeffrey, and Martellus Bennett.
Yeah, and here's the thing. At tight end with Bennett, Bennett's a mega weapon. I don't think that most people are going to argue that. But he got a ton of mileage out of Zach Miller, and not first-round Zach Miller, the mid-round Zach Miller. The tight end guy, he came out of nowhere, and he was in a lot of ways, he was a game changer for Chicago's offense. He got a ton of mileage out of Marquise Wilson. He was rolling with Jeremy Langford as his running back, who's going to end up being a pretty good running back. I think Chicago's high on him right now, and they're right to feel that way. But Chicago's offensive line is not very good outside of Kyle Long, and I think that Matt Flosson's pretty good too. I think Ronas Grassley will end up being pretty decent, but not a lot of stability up front. But the one thing is, all these Bears offensive coordinators over the years have watched Jay take a beating, and they're like, that's okay. We're still going to work with these 7-step drops and everything. And then you saw Chicago come out this year with Gase in there, and it was just a much more deliberate, crafty offense in there, and he really maximized Jay's tools while lowering the interception total. So while the other numbers might have been the same, I think the completion percentage was up a little bit. But it's the fact that, he didn't, Alshon Jeffrey was never healthy this year. Never. They lost Brandon Marshall. Kevin White, who's supposed to be their big game breaker, he's got the shin surgery prior to the season, and so he's out the entire year. They didn't even bother to bring him back when they could have late in the season. So all of your tools that you had lined up to work with your quarterback are out, and I thought he did an excellent job of mobilizing. And that's part of it. He said in all these interviews, they always ask him, what's your best strength? And he says, my ability to adapt, to adjust. And his actions match his rhetoric at this point. Everywhere he's been, he's able to sit there and figure it out, even if your best available options are unavailable because, due to injury or whatever. He finds a way. So, I know I sound ridiculous. I keep trying to build this guy up on Twitter, and they're like, look, we get it. And I'm like, no, I have to tell you more. So.
I don't see why not. Right now, I think if there's anybody who's qualified to talk about it, it'd probably be you, because you actually saw Adam Gase work in a environment where he didn't have Peyton Manning to buffer his supposed ability to make play calls and make adjustments on offense. Because, I mean, you brought up all that stuff about Jay Cutler, but there's also the simple fact that, and I think you'll agree with me on this, Keith, is that Jay Cutler was a head case. And he probably still
Oh,
is. But
totally.
so, and the fact that he was able to turn that part around of him too. I mean, I haven't heard Jay Cutler's name in the media for the wrong reasons ever since Gase showed up. So that in itself is already a huge thing. And Jay Cutler said that I am so thankful to Adam Gase for helping me out in my career. So, and you're thinking this is Jay Cutler. This is not Peyton Manning. Jay Cutler, like he's not one to let's say he's not one to mince words. He usually means what he says. So, and whether it's good or bad, by the way. So it's not just he's making flowery PR speeches. No, Cutler opens his mouth and he pretty much means what he's saying. So for him to say that Adam Gase did as much as he did for him, that's already a plus. It's not PR like, oh, I'm just saying the right thing because reasons and I want to look good in front of the media. This is not Peyton Manning being PR man. This is Jay Cutler we're talking about here. Cutler doesn't open his mouth unless he means what he's saying.
It was
And
the
I was
ultimate
talking to a
rehabilitation project. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I was talking to a few Chicago fans who I know who said that they wanted John Fox to block the interview. I mean, they wanted Adam Gase to stay there so badly because he made so much progress. It was so clear what he was able to do with that offense that when he was able to draw a full stack, I mean, I'd imagine they would get into the offseason, they would draft an offensive lineman, and they would go at it again. But he was able to do some pretty great things in Chicago relative to what they had before. I mean, if you do just a casual look at the box score, you're not going to necessarily see it. But looking at the situational statistics, he took a team that was like in the bottom 5 or bottom 10 in the league for third down and brought them up to top 10. They were converting on a ridiculous percentage of their third downs. And what they were doing was balancing the run and the pass so well that when you got into that situation, it was just so easy. And he makes the offense cohesive. It is not a situation where you go and every player has like a different idea of what their role is. It's the players all understand that what they're doing is going to benefit another player in a certain way. The one receiver knows that the route he's running, he's not catching the ball. He knows that. Unless something happens in the corner trips, he's not catching the football. He knows that the underneath receiver who he just cleared out is going. If Joe Philbin and Bill Lazor were they might have been like a children's book in offense, and what Adam Gase is going to bring in is a Russian novel. I mean, it is going to be ridiculous how much.
I agree. That's perfect.
Third down. What do you think we should do? Everyone run in a straight line. But like, it's now there's actually going to be some level of thought put into it, which is a really novel concept and a beautiful thing.
He's in the business of communication, which is the most important thing. I mean, and he gets that. And
Exactly.
I mean, you said it perfect. Jay Cutler is a head case. And the guy who, prior to Adam Gase, was the one who probably got along with Jay Cutler best during his career was Jeremy Bates, who was his quarterback coach. I think he was in Denver, and then I think he ended up coming to Chicago too. And that was considered like the connection or whatever. And then you notice that once someone actually got through to Jay Cutler, it was I repeat myself on this all the time, but it really bears repeating, and it warrants it. Or it's warranted, I should say. This time last year, people were bringing their Jay Cutler jerseys up here. Everyone hated him. Everyone hated the contract that he had. He was absolutely public enemy number one up here. No one liked Jay Cutler. And the entire season, they were like, or off season, they said, we don't care what happens with this guy this season or what he does. He is dead to us. We hate him. We want him out of here. Adam Gase comes in, all of a sudden builds up Jay Cutler, gets all of Chicago to just buy right back in on him. And his contract, which was an impossible feat. I still can't believe he pulled that off. I mean, because I had all my friends that have in the middle of the season were like, we're not doing it. We're not going to do it. We're not buying back in on Jay Cutler. And then at the end of the season, they're like, you know what? We can make this work. And I was like, there it is. So, I mean,
Ryan Tannehill's contract is like a godsend. I mean, it's really not even close to as bad. People see, it's almost $100 million. It's not. He's basically, we can get rid of him after next season if we want to. Next season is make or break. Adam Gase said it. Adam Gase said, like, I don't have any preconceived notions about Ryan Tannehill. He's never had to watch film on Ryan Tannehill. He knows that he can work with him this year, and if it doesn't work, they'll go back to the drawing board. Because if Ryan Tannehill doesn't work, Miami will be picking in the top 5 of the draft. It's just that simple. So we'll be able to get another quarterback in theory if it doesn't work. But chances are it does. I really firmly believe that what Adam Gase is doing is going to be perfectly set up for what Ryan Tannehill wants to do. Ryan Tannehill has wanted control at the line of scrimmage. He has wanted it. And now he's finally going to be given what he has wanted. When a football player goes to the coach and says, this is what I think I need to succeed, and the coach nods his head and it goes in one ear out the other, he's not helping anybody. Like, yes, Coach Philbin, we understand that you have a scheme and we understand that you have this idea of what should and shouldn't be happening, but it got in the way of his ability to utilize his players to the best ability. And that was the first thing Adam Gase said when he got there. He said, it's not going to be the round hole in the square peg. He gets in there and he says, we are going to use our players the best way they can be used, not the best way for our scheme. He is going to use the players how they should be used. And I think it's going to make a difference for Ryan Tannehill. And hopefully Vance Joseph adopts that same philosophy on the defensive side of the ball. Because that would be great, to be able to utilize the linebackers with Sue the way that you can, because he makes the linebacker. I think if we can get a dynamic linebacker this year, we don't necessarily need to make too many changes at corner. We can roll with Brent Grimes because the linebackers are so dangerous. We remember what it was in Detroit with like DeAndre Levy and Stephen Tulloch and all those players who were able to succeed with Ndamukong Suh up there because it's simple math. 2 guys are blocking him. So hopefully Adam Gase brought Vance Joseph in because he said, I want to use that type of strategy where we best utilize the talent of our players.
I think one of the most exciting things is listening to guys with Gase is I truly don't think we need that much turnover, I guess, on offense. I think we could definitely use a veteran guard, and I suspect they'll get one. And we obviously
Bring
need
back Richie Incognito.
I would,
Yes,
yeah.
Incognito.
Hey, it's a new regime. Sorry about that whole Joe Philbin garbage. Can we bring you back now?
I'll be able to bring my jersey back. I wish I owned a Richie Incognito
But
jersey.
I am under no at all really willing to give up on Jamil Douglas or Billy Turner. I still think they have good upsides to them. I just think they need a veteran presence in there if they are struggling, and they need some coaching obviously as well. But I do believe they need a veteran guard, and we obviously need to get another starting caliber tackle, because I think we would really be rolling the dice to expect Brandon Alberts to hold up a whole season again. I know he had a comeback here this year, and he was getting back to the Brandon Albert of old towards the end of the year, but I still it's just hurt us too many times not to have a capable backup tackle. So I think they need to address a few things on the line, but those aren't first round pick issues they necessarily. I think they can both be addressed in free agency. And then he's got his receivers in place. He's got Devontae Parker, who I think is going to be very exciting with Gase down the field. Obviously, Jarvis Landry is a very good slot receiver. I don't think even if they don't get Lamar Miller back, I think with Ajayi, I don't think you need to invest a bunch of money or a real high draft pick into a running back. And so I think Gase really has what he needs to work with in place there already. They just need a few things. On the defensive side, I think they need a lot more players. They actually need to bring in more talent. And so I think that's definitely going to be the more challenging side of it, because I believe they have to get in another. That I don't believe our number 2 corner is on our roster right now. I think Tony Lippett has potential to be a number 2 corner, but we absolutely got to either use a really high draft pick on a corner, or we got to spend the money on getting a decent one in there to pair with Brett Grimes, I think. And then hopefully by a year from then, Lippett or Bobby McCain will be a lot more clear. Or if we get a younger guy in there, we don't even have the talent on our team right now to even make a decision in linebacker. And so my hope is that Gase alone is going to be such a big difference from what our previous coaches are that we won't have to add a bunch of our resources into our offense. That he'll take what we have and really up our points total.
There is the. Are you guys concerned about what I'm about to say at all here? Because naturally, somebody we all know and love to hate brings up the fact that the Chicago Bears' first quarter offense was actually like the only team that was worse than the Dolphins. So, are we
Oh,
concerned about that at all?
I'm proud of him. He figured out how to use Google and Google first quarter scoring stats. It's that team. It doesn't first quarter scoring stats also I think are one of the most overrated stats in football
Well,
situationally
one of the
scoring
biggest things
wise.
we
I just
complained,
like
Max. One of the biggest things we complained about was the slow starts for the Dolphins.
no, I wasn't necessarily concerned with the slow starts. I was concerned with the slow games. I mean, we were like one of the worst scoring offenses in the league. First quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. I mean, we were one of the worst in the league. And the Chicago Bears offense was not a vertical unit that was built to kill you on deep passes. It was not, the 2013 Broncos where they had so many receivers that someone was wide open deep down the field every play. It's a situation where they would grind you down throughout the game and they would win a few, but they didn't win many because they didn't really have good enough personnel to even do that. Adam Gase wanted to utilize what he best could to make that happen, and it just wasn't a fast start type of offense. It's just basically it doesn't make any sense to quote that statistic in my mind. Yeah.
That was honestly the Bears this season, probably a 2-win team without Adam Gase. Win 6 games, probably honestly should have won about 9. 2 of them were based off of missed field goals, and I think they had one which they just really blew to Green Bay at the beginning of the season. They should have swept Green Bay. A lot of that has to do with Vic Fangio, so you can't put that all on Adam Gase and say, but honestly, that was expected to be one of the worst teams in football this year. I mean, you had a complete turnover on defense, and they're using a 3-4 scheme. A lot of overhaul in terms of the offensive approach after an incredibly poor year from Cutler and Company on offense the previous year. That really, I expected them to win about 2 games this year, and then they ended up winning about 6. Should have been about 8 or 9. Really could have been in contention for that last playoff spot as a 6th seed in the NFC. So the slow starts will concern everyone, but I honestly, that guy won me over. I don't have an issue with it moving forward at this point because I think that he's I just think that it's the right situation with the right personnel. I think it can work.
So essentially, you guys are saying that the slow starts are not necessarily the results of an anemic offense. It's just the way that the offense is designed.
It was a miracle that they could move that offense at all. Honestly.
Right, exactly.
That offense was a
that
dumpster fire.
Abysmal. And it was the way the offense was built. And I'm just going to come straight out and say it. It's very frustrating that Omar doesn't necessarily look at the film when he's doing that. And like he can say he's quote unquote studying, but that's looking at stats. And looking at stats doesn't really tell you the whole picture. It can be a very useful tool in analysis when you're looking at the film. Like when I was watching Adam Gase's offense on third down, I looked percentage. When I just look in a vacuum, it doesn't tell you anything. It tells you, yeah, they're good on third down, but it doesn't tell you why. Because if they're good on third down because they ran the ball and for some reason they had a dominant guard that just cleared a gap every time, then that's awesome. But that's not going to help the Dolphins because they're not going to do that next year. But they had personnel groupings that allowed receivers to get open with the right number of yards for a conversion on third down. And so you combine film with stats to get a true conclusion. And I just don't think he was reaching a conclusion that way.
And that's something that happens in the league everywhere. And a lot of the times with the Dolphins, it's like, and Dolphins fans, I've really been beating up on Dolphins fans these past couple of months, haven't I? But it's just
easy. It's easy.
It's too easy. But they look at the stats and they say, well, Ryan Tannehill sucks, or Lamar Miller is just not good enough. He's not worth it. Or you look at Olivier Vernon and say, well, look how many sacks he got. He's awesome. We got to keep him. And there's no context. And football, even the world itself, guys. I mean, let's go on a deeper level here. The world in itself is losing the idea of context. Like, I think I'm hesitant to go here because it's like the football, the world, life in general. Context is so important in everything that you do, and people don't want to use it. They just want to scream and holler things because, oh my God, look at this thing, and like ignore the context that makes it viable, or ignore the context that may justify it, or ignore the context that may condemn it for for all we know. They don't care about context. They just want to. They just want to yell and holler.
That's the Twitter sports world. That's what it is. There's no
And
context. Everyone sees something happen.
Yeah.
They see something happen and they say, "Oh, what's 140 characters I can use to describe that?" Not like they don't take the time to hot take world. But it's very rare. And it's also, I should say, with the beat writers, they're busy people. It's, it's different from when I say I've got a couple hours and I spend some time watching film. They're busy. They're always writing articles. They're always doing that. Some find the time to do it, but it's just everyone, you're exactly right. It's all about context. They want to look at Ryan Tannehill. They want to look at the offensive line, but they don't feel like looking at them together. They want to look at the defense's struggles, but they don't want to look at what we have to do next season to improve. They just want Ndamukong Suh to play well. They don't necessarily realize that if we improve the linebacking core and Ndamukong Suh, you're going to see why he's so important. It's a world that has been created by the way sports media has been. And we could watch a playoff game next weekend where Jonathan Stewart runs for 250 yards and David Johnson catches 8 passes and runs for 100 yards, and they're still going to show us Carson Palmer and Cam Newton's stat lines at the end of the game. I mean, it is the world that has been created for sports without context. And it's unfortunate, but it is the way it is.
The worst thing about Twitter, in my opinion, is that, and it's also the best thing about it, is that it puts everyone on an even playing field in terms of being able to communicate. So, I mean, you can have distinguished people out there who really know what they're talking about, and then you get this band of, you get a band of idiots out there who go out of their way to say, like, you suck, that's dumb, that makes no sense. It makes perfect sense. And, I mean, it turns into this whole ambush on these people who put out things that are actually factual, things that are actually true. I mean, this is an exaggerated example. This is one I always use. Is one of the guys I follow on Twitter is Larry King, and Larry King made some tweet about he still loved going to South Florida and seeing the Dolphins play and everything, and he was a part of the loved being a part of the 72 team and whatnot. And someone was like, "What the hell do you know about football and the 72 Dolphins?" And it's like, listen, jackass, he used to call games for the Dolphins back in the early 70s. He's off there. So I mean, oftentimes with Twitter, you get a lot of people who disagree with you, and then you find out that those people are either just trolling you or they really don't know what they're talking about. Which is hard to...
People also always need to draw a conclusion out of everything. That's another problem. Like, I wrote an article last week breaking down how Tannehill is going to fit into the Adam Gase offense, and people were writing back to me saying, like, how are you already thinking in this offense? How are you already, like, making predictions about the season? I didn't predict anything. I wrote that I think Tannehill has the ability to be successful in this offense. I didn't say, I think Ryan Tannehill is going to throw for 5,000 yards and do this and that in the offense. The only prediction I made that was an actual prediction is I think Jarvis Landry is going to catch a ton of passes. But everyone needs to draw a conclusion from everything, which is the issue. Like you're saying, they can't just read Larry King's tweet and say, oh, like he has fun, like remembering that kind of stuff. They have to say, like, what can I draw from this? And the other thing is,
Yeah,
it's not like
how can I make
Twitter
myself
could
look smarter?
right. Twitter could be such a good forum for learning. I learned so much reading tweets from people who know what they're talking about. Ian, guys like Ian Wharton who know what they're saying,
And
and
Spoon,
they'll
rest in
consistently put
peace.
out great content. Right. Well, yeah. And like guys who will consistently put out the content that tells you like, hey, this is something really interesting that you should know. And it's not necessarily, it's not a debate tool. Like we can leave that for Facebook. People can get all up in the Facebook comments however much they want. But Twitter really is a good place to learn. I've learned a ton about the game from the people I've met there and the people who I've spoken with, who I've been able to get to know through that. And it's a really good forum for that. But it's also negative because there are people who hop on who, like, I saw a great exchange today between Benjamin Albright where someone told him, like, something to the effect of, like, stick to football or something. And the guy was like, the guy telling him to stick to football was like a carpenter or something. Like an equally irrelevant career for whatever they were talking about. It's like everyone feels the either negatively or positively. And it's like sometimes like a little kid where like negative attention is better than no attention at all for them. Like that's how I feel like the people are on Twitter. Like last week I retweeted something about like President Barack Obama, like a petition or something silly for him to play in the NBA All-Star game. And someone like tried to like start a political debate with me and I said like, "Oh, I don't talk politics on Twitter." And they said, "Oh, but you retweeted a thing about President Obama playing in the All-Star game." It's like, dude, like what is the goal for those kind of people? And that's exactly what we're getting at here. The context is so important for everything in just in life, and then especially in football analysis when you're talking about a team. And when you get down to it and you try to take things out of context, it usually doesn't work. I mean, there are instances where you can pull a stat out of context and it makes sense, or like you can pull a statement out of context, but very, 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 very rarely will it truly work.
I love Twitter, but it's the millennial vehicle from hell. And I mean, for all the reasons you just said, like you have people who draw really weird conclusions. I mentioned the thing about the AFC quarterbacks yesterday and how maybe take it easy on Tannehill. He's not the only one barely staying afloat in the AFC. And some guys like, what does the AFC thing have to do with Ryan Tannehill struggling? And I was like, well, just kind of some food for thought, a broader perspective. He was like 4 years is too much, and it just turns into this thing where it's like it's either their way or no way. And there's a lot of people like that. So, I mean, and the funny thing is, I find that the topic of Ryan Tannehill might be more controversial than politics at this point. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's amazing how much of a polarized topic it has become. I'll put something out there, like I'll tweet something Tannehill, and I'll get a bunch of people who like it, and then I will get some people who will just come after me, like I just shot their dog. And you just think like, I mean, he's a player. You got one more year of him regardless. I mean, it's not. I don't see NBA's getting into the draft this year and thinking like, screw it, I don't want this guy. I'm just, give me Carson Wentz, whatever. So it's really confusing and it's a little bit discouraging because I mean it takes away from a lot of the really good communication you can have with people about football, which is like all the sites we work for. If it's Bleacher Report or working for SB Nation, I've been able to talk to, and get to know a lot of people talking about football, and it's an amazing thing. And you're able to bounce ideas off each other. You're like when we talk about draft stuff, if I'm talking to the guys I work with on the site and whatnot, we'll bounce ideas and say, well, we've looked at this player, or I really like this player. Or have you thought about this guy? Is number 8 too high for Reggie Ragland? That's like the thing we always talk about right now. Go ahead.
Yeah, like last year, same thing. I sat at training camp. I met Lewis through Twitter, and we sat together at training camp and bounced ideas off of each other. And I thought I got a lot out of watching that practice and discussing it. Like, it's such a good community to meet people and discuss. I didn't know any of the, Dolphins writers I talk to now pretty consistently before I started having these conversations on Twitter. I mean, it's a great forum, and I've now decided after what you said, Keith, that I'm officially going to change the social media folder in my phone to Millennial Vehicles of Hell, because that is just like the greatest thing I've ever heard.
it's great. I mean, like anything else, any other modern invention. I mean, there's so many great applications with it. I mean, a lot of it we've already covered. And we haven't even talked about the fact that if you want your news faster than anyone, I mean, you get it through Twitter now.
Oh
You know,
yeah, it's
I mean,
so
like all
quick because you don't
the
need to write a story. Because you don't need
no,
to write
all
a
the
story.
tragic things that have my first introduction, my introduction to that was I mean, and it's a grim one, but like when the Boston Marathon bombings happened, I knew about those like 20 minutes before it was on TV, because you had people who were there tweeting it out, which is both incredibly sad, but I mean, we live in this this media world, sports media and media, where it's not about being right, it's about being first. And you have these people who are practically crawling all over each other to get their story out and say, like, I was the first guy to do that. And I mean, and that hurts the overall industry, it hurts the project, it hurts the moment. I mean, like, there can be some good things from it too, of course, but yeah, it can be such a frustrating thing. But I mean, I also love, like, I put something up a couple of weeks ago, and I'm actually kind of confused right now because I've talked to a lot of Dolphins fans on Twitter who want to draft Laquan Treadwell at 8. I'm always thinking like I'm good with the offensive skill position personnel for the most part. I mean, how many receivers do you need here? I mean, he's an awesome receiver. Don't get me wrong. I mean, like,
in the first round. Let's do
I
it.
would never thumb my nose at a player like that, because I mean, he's excellent. And honestly, he blew me away in that Sugar Bowl game. Like, he was just, I mean, he, like, it was, everything was on full display in that game. I mean, he was high pointing the ball. He showed an ability to stretch the field. I mean, he showed, like, he's a physical guy too, because he's bigger than I thought. I didn't know that he was measured at 6'2". We'll see if it comes to that. But, you know, so, I mean, it's great. And, like, we sit there and we're able to discuss all these things about prospects. And now, if you want to be a guy who writes about the draft on Twitter, I mean, you notice that a lot of these guys, if they're not associated with major sites, they're always wearing suits. And I could never really understand that. I could never figure that out. Like, in their avatar, they're always wearing suits. Like, they look like lawyers.
It's presentation.
And then, I guess so. Like, I mean, I'll take my draft info from this guy because his tie game is on point, or his haircut game is bomb. So, I mean, I don't know, but yeah, the latest discussion we had is because I have this theory that I think that Miles Jack will either go to Dallas or Jacksonville. Because I can see Jerry Jones as being absolutely over the moon for a player like that. Because I mean, he's always been into drafting guys like Bruce Carter, you know, like the really fast linebackers, and then you get a guy like Miles Jack who's just on another plane, really, in terms of playing ability and upside athleticism. I mean, the whole boat there, and I can't see Dallas getting over that. So you think, like, I mean, all these guys we talked about, like, you know, Ramsey, Hargraves, Alexander, Jack too, and it's like, what if the cover that we're looking at is somewhat bare by 8? Who would we look at? And we had a discussion where, is it too high for Reggie Ragland? Because now you're seeing that he's mocked. You know, I've seen him going to the Bears at number 11 and whatnot. So I mean, that's like the discussion that we've been having the past week or so, and it's a good one.
Can you imagine what Twitter's going to be like when they put the, like, 10,000 character limit?
Well, it's gonna look the same because, like, it's gonna they said it's gonna be kind of like Facebook, where, like, at a certain point it cuts off and says, like, click here for more.
Yeah, but there's
I
going to
think
be a
most
lot of
people are
click
still
here
gonna
for
stick with
more.
format. Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of consolidation at that point.
yeah, it's not gonna be fun. But I think it's a really good point about, like, who you can. And as someone who just got into this, Twitter was one of the, like, most useful things for me to, like, get feedback from other people and to find new people to communicate with about this. I mean, I constantly bounce ideas and ask for advice from people who are there, who are more established writers who have been doing. And if you use it the correct way, it's a great tool.
I love it. I'm sorry I missed out on the discussion about Mackenzie Alexander. I felt that, even though, like, I'm still not, because I mean, I'm only on one side of the argument because I'm such a huge Vernon Hargraves fan. I keep calling him VH3, and people are always like, Van Halen 3, and I'm like, no, that album sucks. So, but yeah, I'm sorry I missed out on the Alexander discussion. So I'm sure it was a good one.
I'm sure we'll revisit it in the coming weeks. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's anybody still left listening to this show, because we've been going on for 2 hours and 2 and 1/4 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes, guys. We've been on the air for, I think this might be a
Woo!
record for how long we've been on. So we're going to call it a night right here. Most of our guys have already bowed out because I guess they're going to bed. So I am appreciative to both Max and Keith for sticking with me for so long. Even my co-host Chad, he finally had to take off because this show was just
Sleep is
going
for
for
the weak. Sleep is for the weak.
Sleep is for the weak. Yeah, no, it's unbelievable. I mean, I think this is an awesome discussion though, because I feel like a lot of it doesn't always have to be like this big football discussion. It's nice to just chew the fat, so to speak, and even then, it's still relevant about football in a way because I mean, hey, we all need to learn these lessons about life, the life lessons from the PhinManiacs, ladies and gentlemen. That's going to be it for this evening. I want to thank you guys for joining me. And as always, for my co-host, Chad Ronenbaum, for Ian Wharton of the Bleacher Report for joining us. And of course, we have Max Himmelrich from the Deep End Miami and Keith Beebe. I keep doing that. I keep forgetting the second B at the end. Keith Beebe from the Finsider with a PH. Actually, Max is with the Finsider with a PH now too. Anyway,
Yep.
Yeah.
yeah. He stole Matt stole Matt didn't even I didn't even know Max was open for another job for jeez.
I wasn't even open. But
So I
here
had to
I am.
convince you.
I should have opened myself up for free agency. I should have done like the head
Yeah,
coaching
it's
interview.
like geez, man, it's like that's tampering. That's tampering is what it is.
I could have done like the decision, the LeBron thing.
Like Keith, you guys need to be fined a draft pick.
What's that?
You guys need to be fined a draft pick for tampering and picking Max off the streets without anybody knowing he was on the streets.
I refer. I mean, Max, that Gates article he wrote was outstanding. So I mean, that wasn't a tough spell.
All right.
Appreciate that.
So that's going to be it for this evening. I want to thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you all next week for another PhinManiacs.com podcast.